Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to introduce to you family court survivor and whistleblower, devoted and loving father of three, tireless anti-child abuse, family court reform, and survivor advocate, former lawyer, champion, truth warrior, and someone I'm lucky to call a friend, Brad Conley. It's been a long time coming to have Brad on the show, you guys. I met Brad on Twitter a couple years ago through mutual friends in the survivor community, and immediately he became a massive advocate for the imagination and a fast friend. Come to find out, that wasn't the only thing he was advocating for. Having been wrongfully accused for crimes he didn't commit in the family court system, like you've heard many times on this podcast, Brad has spent years raising awareness of corruption in family court, advocating for other parents who have also received unjust treatment, and shining a light on his own story, which involves wrongful accusations that he never committed, yet has been penalized for. As Brad has continued to weave together the tapestry of what has transpired since his divorce, his story twists and turns through the formidable landscapes of Southern California and into places like Hollywood and questionable universities like UC Irvine. Aside from having his own massive puzzle to piece together, Brad is also a tireless advocate for the survivor community, continually lifting up and elevating the voices of survivors, advocates, and parents alike, while taking his knowledge and helping others piece together their own puzzles. Brad has been a massive support system for the imagination, and I can honestly say that this show wouldn't be what it is today without his ongoing encouragement, enthusiasm to connect with all my guests, validate and elevate all of them, and his willingness to listen to each episode and help connect dots for other parents and survivors who are also on the battlefield daily. Brad carries a heavy story of his own on his shoulders, and yet he is so selfless with sharing the testimonies of others that I actually had no idea that he was also a witness and a survivor until quite a while after I began engaging with him online. His advocacy work is selfless, and he has been a tremendous help with getting the stories of survivors and parents heard and circulated further. Brad is one of the few fathers I have met that are on the family court battlefield. And with all the advocacy work he does for others, it's time we rally around him and elevate his story in the same way he does for every survivor and whistleblower that he comes in contact with. Before I finish introducing today's guest, I wanted to give a quick reminder that if you're a survivor or whistleblower who wants to share your story on the podcast or who wants to share any information privately with me, you can now email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. I'd also love your support on Substack, where I'm taking up journaling as an outlet for me personally to reflect on the podcast, my guests, and my advocacy work. And you can subscribe to me at www.emmacatherine.substack.com. All of my other social media links are in the show notes, and I can't thank you all enough for your courage to shine a light on the darkness with me and each guest on each episode. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, voice for the voiceless, fierce warrior father, whistleblower, survivor, and inspiration, Brad Conley. Brad, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Oh, thank you, Emma.
It's an honor. This has been a long time coming. I've been engaging with you now for a couple of years, and this is today that we're talking. This is actually my first time getting to meet you face to face. So this is a really special moment for me, and I hope for a lot of other people on the show. You are a massive advocate on Twitter. And I always tell people, like, come join Twitter, you guys. If you're listening to this, Twitter's where it's at for social media with the survivor community. And Brad, who you guys are all going to get to meet today, has been an integral part of that. He has shared far and wide literally everybody's stories that are on Twitter disclosing or sharing the interviews that they're on. Brad knows it all, and his whole page is just filled with advocating for people and sharing it. And a lot of the people that I follow now, I've actually found through him, or he's introduced me to. And he's been a really big puzzle piece in helping connect all these dots together. So I'm really excited. I'm sure some of you that are listening follow him on Twitter and have also never seen his face. So Brad, we're really honored to have you here today.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And that was a really nice introduction. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, now that we know, and anybody that follows you, they know how much you advocate for other people. Not a lot of people know about you, though. You're so humble online with, staying a little bit behind the curtain in a sense, and really elevating other people. You do sneak parts of your story in here and there. So if people follow you, they're going to catch these awesome threads where you actually do a deep dive into a part of your story that's, really, really compelling. But I thought we'd go back just like how we do with every guest on the show. And I'd love for you to do a full introduction of yourself from childhood and talk about your upbringing and the family that you grew up in. And we'll slowly work our way to the present and get through these really crucial moments that you've experienced.
Okay, that sounds good. So I was born in 1967 in San Bernardino, California. And I have a younger sister. So there were four of us in our family. And probably the most significant thing I think in my childhood was that my dad, he was just to give you an idea, he was a Coast Guard officer, he was a businessman, and he was a college athlete. And when I was very young, he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I think I was I think I was about 5 years old, and my sister was about 2.5 or so. And so that was central to our growing up and our family dynamics. And so what happened was we didn't know what was going to happen, but he, as we received it as children, he was, not well, or he needed help. And so those were my first prayers, even, we'd pray for his legs, to be better, because he wasn't able to walk as well. And then he was, and sometime later he walked with a cane and then in a wheelchair. And so he never really had remission. It only got worse for a long time, but we didn't know that. So it was weird. It was like, always hoping and praying that things would get better, but they never did, at least physically like that. And then within that dynamic, but it wasn't all bad. So, I was there and I had a relationship with him, and he was home. And so I don't want to, it wasn't like it was all bad, but it was tragic and it was difficult. And then my mom, excuse me, my nose itches for some reason, didn't the whole pre-interview. So my mom, she took care of him. She was a caregiver. And as he got worse, she helped more. And they were both heroic in that way, but I didn't always appreciate it at the time, or I didn't fully, like I would as an adult. So it was sad. It was frustrating. And also, it was a difficult dynamic. So my mom took care of my dad, and my sister and I often took care of each other within that dynamic. So she was not abusive, not really, sometimes verbally, to be honest. I think she would admit that. But we were together. She never left, and everyone did the best they could, I think. But it was hard. It was in its own way, it was hard. And it was a hard place to grow up. If probably some people, if they know the place, they know what I'm talking about. And then, so from there, I went to, I went to college, and then I went to law school. So I went to college, I went to USC, which was in Los Angeles, and I was really excited to go there. I was on a full scholarship, which was a big deal because we didn't really have the means to do that kind of thing. And I think I'm going to try and tell it really fast, and if there's more to talk about, we can. So I was there for 4 years, and then I went to law school at Pepperdine, which is in Malibu, and then I lived in Malibu for some years after that. So all of it was in Southern California. And then as part of that, when I was in law school, I got sober. So for alcohol, basically.
What can I ask? What inspired you to go to law school?
Why did I decide?
Yeah.
So I used to have two answers. Now I just have one. So like when I had two answers, like the false one was something that was sort of like, I can't even remember what it was. I mean, I even think that I thought it was kind of true, but whatever it was not the real answer. So but the real answer was that, and I'm glad you asked me this because this is me thinking live. I didn't know what to do. And I really didn't know what to do. I'd kind of gotten myself to college, which got me out of the difficult family situation that I was in, and kind of did it in a neat way as a trustee scholar with a full academic scholarship. But I came out of it with, I'd been drinking and partying a lot. Some of that was fairly normal, that it wasn't like it was just me. It wasn't even like I was the worst, but it was causing me problems. And it was a time where my dad had really deteriorated. And so I was close enough to where I was going home a lot, and I liked being there, but I also didn't like being there. And I think I was self-medicating, or whatever you want to call it. But I wasn't like talking to people about what I was finding difficult in life and really thinking about what it meant and what I wanted to do. It was internalized, and it was not super appropriate and not healthy. So the decision to do that was, what am I going to do? Because, I'm about to graduate and I can't keep going to school here. Got to do something. I don't know what I'm going to do. I think that it was a really big downturn in the economy at that time. So the job market just generally wasn't very good. But I didn't have an idea. But I liked the beach a lot. And I went up and I visited the law school up in Malibu, and I thought, well, I can go to school here, they'll admit me. And if I did, I'll learn a few things. I'll figure some stuff out. The worst thing that'll happen is I'll get a law degree and I'll spend 3 years at the beach. So that was what that's the honest answer. I just wasn't sure. And I knew, and I probably wasn't even sure that I could be an effective employee or worker at that time. I just didn't know what to do. But I knew that I could do school, and I liked it. I liked learning, and I was interested in it.
And was that when you said when your sobriety began? Or else were you still self-medicating throughout law school as well?
Well, I got sober while I was in law school, so before I graduated. So the first part of it was, so then, it's a interesting place to live and to be, because it's not really convenient. It's a little bit out of the way, and it's kind of expensive. And then it's very much like the entertainment industry is prominent there. So people that are famous and people that you would know, but then much more than that, a lot of people that work, like really talented people too, that work in the industry, but not necessarily in front of cameras. So, writers, people who work with cameras, people that work with sound, and all kinds of different jobs. So I lost my train of thought for the first time. It won't be the last, I'm sure.
Okay, no, there's a lot to talk about with these. I want to connect what you're talking about with something that from your childhood that we had talked about before we started recording.
Yeah.
Not a direct connection, but it seems like you had always been a very bright kid. Like you had mentioned that you, even if you don't have memories of going into gifted and talented programs and experiencing abuse, you
Right.
were sought out for those programs and took a lot of the testing for it, right? So you had
Right.
always had gifts that were, maybe you could talk about that if you had like a high IQ or if there were things about you. Because law school isn't, I have never met somebody who's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to law school. Most people are like, oh, I'm going to get maybe like a business degree and then I can sort of figure it out. Or that's like a pretty ambitious thing. That's why I wanted to know, because that's from coming from a hard, didn't sound like you had a lot of examples of like really successful people. Like you had sort of a hard childhood in a sense and saw some dysfunction, and somehow you sought after this like really prestigious, high paying job. It's not easy to, test for the bar, go through this, but it seems like you've always been intelligent your whole life.
Yeah. Well, I was a smart kid and I liked learning. I was really curious about the world. But I don't think I was especially unusual in that way. I was always really good at math, loved math. I thought that originally that's what I thought I was going to do.
Yeah.
I almost did actually. Um, but I've listened with great interest to some of the people who've spoken at length about the gifted and talented programs, and especially where they got um, taken out of regular schools and were abused, like up at SRI at Stanford and some of the others. I'm really grateful for what they had to share, and it was interesting. So I didn't have that kind of experience. They called it GATE. I think it was early, it was probably when the program was pretty new. And I was in a special group with 4 other kids. They were all boys. I think that was just, I don't know, that was just the way it was. And it was weird. We were in like a classroom. This was first, second, and third grade, but especially second and third grade. And we were in a classroom that was like connected to the real classroom. It was like the separate room, and it had glass at least on one wall. And we would do some of the schoolwork in there, but we were still a part of the regular class as well. I remember I was tested quite a bit. I think it was for IQ. I think my parents knew what it was. I don't think I did. And I remember that they would test me for like patterns and memory and how many numbers in a row could I remember and can I do stuff. And I think the other boys, the 4 other ones, that they would get that same thing. But not a whole lot of other stuff. Like I don't think we were taken out. I don't remember going on bus trips to lots of places and that kind of thing. And then I moved once in childhood, just from like one city to another. So it was from Rialto, which is adjacent to San Bernardino, but there is basically the same area. And then when I was in the different school, then I was in different stuff. And so there I went to a different school each year for a while, until high school. But I mean, for 4 years. Well, and that was weird because none of them were the school that was right down the street from my house, because we were being bused, for integration.
So instead of going to the closest school, you were being bused to schools that maybe geographically seemed less convenient than the first option.
Well, they were trying. So yeah, I mean, so San Bernardino itself, it was a hard city. So it's I mean, I love the people there, so I don't like to say anything bad about it, and I really don't have anything bad to say about the people. But it was a place where there was dangerous in parts. There was a lot of crime in parts. But where I lived was in an area that was primarily white, and there were other parts of the city that were not. And so they were to integrate it. They were taking people on buses from around where I lived and bringing us to another place, and then doing the opposite in other places. I mean, I think none of it, I don't think any of it was very helpful. I'm not even sure how good the intentions were, but it was meant to, to accomplish something, but it was not related. That part wasn't related to gate. It was very, the upheaval in my life though was, dramatic. So I mean, it's already hard enough. And then to do that, and spent a lot of time. And then the worst part of all was when we ended up at the other schools, it was just basically everyone that was on the bus was all in the same school. So it looked like it was integrated, but it's even worse because, you're not really connecting with, it's not a real kind of integration. It was more like just a bubble. So, I mean, that's kind of here nor there. And I think a lot of people probably have experiences like that too.
It's always interesting how these stories sort of collide, and picking out
yeah.
the things that people have in common, so that to me, it sort of shows that from a young age, you had, even if it wasn't, something that you would consider genius level, or if you weren't, didn't have like an IQ off the charts, that type of thing,
Right.
you had an maybe above average intellect, and were curious and things like that. And I think that crossed over whenever you got older and were faced with that decision of, well, what do I do after school? And you picked like one of the hardest things to go into, which I think is really cool. So tell us about law school. You told us a little bit. So you went through the first part, later on started to get sober, and what sort of started transpiring in your life around that time?
Yeah. Well, so, I was in law school. I experienced it as very interesting. So I found the subject and the classes, quite enjoyable. But my personal life was not, this was not, I was drinking too much, and it was starting to cause me a lot of problems. And I was doing it with people that were, in or related to the entertainment business, which meant, I knew it was just what I was doing. And so it got to a point where the thing that precipitated my going to AA, so it's Alcoholics Anonymous there in then getting sober and staying. So that was 32 years ago. So I've been sober for that long.
Congrats, that's awesome.
Is that right? 32. I think, well, anyway, it was 1992.
I'm not good at math. That was
no, it's not. Or 1990, October 1991. So, 32, I guess. I mean, it gotten worse and worse. I was talking to a therapist at school, that they provided. And I remember telling her, like, I'd like tell her what happened, but I wouldn't tell her, like, I would make it like not as bad. And then she was reflecting back to me like that was super bad. And so that was kind of the start of thinking like, well, this is a problem. So I kind of knew it was a problem. And then I I got in my car to go back to see, my mom and my dad. And my dad he was doing worse and worse. And I had a convertible 64 Ford Falcon, which was really awesome to drive in on PCH in Malibu back then. And I had a Dalmatian. So I got my Dalmatian, got my car, I had the top down. I'm going to drive out to San Bernardino to go home for like the weekend. And I got a DUI, basically. And I got it, if anyone knows where it is, I got pulled over right in front of the Miller. There's like a big Miller distributor. Like there's a giant Miller sign that's spinning on the freeway. If you drive by it, some people in LA will know what I'm talking about. And so I was there, and it was, it was humiliating to be in law school, or, about to get arrested. My dog goes to the pound, my car gets impounded. All of these things happen, and I have to call for help. I have to get a ride. And it was humiliating. And it was also like, I already knew that I was having problems. And so thankfully I had this, like the feeling and the sense I had was, so a lot of shame, and disappointment in myself. But part of it too was like, it can get a lot worse than this. And there's nothing that I'm doing right now that indicates like that there's just going to be some magical way to get better. And so that was pretty much the end of that right there. I ended up going to court, and there were some consequences for that. But one of them was I had to go to AA. And I knew at the time, and other people were talking about it too, like you could lie about it. You could just, like they would require a signature, and you could like just sign it yourself or whatever, and nobody would know. And for whatever reason, I felt like if I were to do that, like the kind of, like it was almost like karma, right? I felt like if I were to do that, like then I'm really going to have something bad happen. And anyway, it's going to have to happen at some point. How about just now? And so fortunately, I had that kind of attitude, and that's what stuck pretty much then to now. So that's what was going on. It was in the middle of law school. I think it was maybe toward more closer to graduation, but I think it was my second year of 3, I think. And then what ended up happening was I was in early sobriety, and then a little bit after that, graduate. So then, so I start law school, it's like the end of my drink. I tell people that like I drank for, like I had like my lifetime of drinking. I just finished it way earlier than other people, like
That phase over with early on.
Yeah, it's over. And and it is. And, that's good. I mean, I wonder occasionally, like, well, because I'm so much different now, would I be able to do it and tolerate it and be okay? And I'm not going to, so I don't want to find out. And I'm happier anyway. And then if I tell people who know me, they're like, no, don't. They won't let me. They're like, no way, we don't want to find out either. But so it's all part of my story, and it's all part of what I, at this point, and what I learned. But at the time, it was super confusing. I mean, I started law school without a good idea. And then I went to it where it was like the worst of that part of, drinking and alcoholism. And then the early part of sobriety, which is, I don't think it's ever graceful. If it is, that's pretty remarkable, because you're there because you got to the point where it was a sufficient bottom. Sometimes they'll call it. I was like, this is bad enough for me, and I don't want it to have to get even worse for it to be bad enough for me. It's bad enough. what it meant was like that law school was not, I wasn't exactly setting the world on fire. But I mean, I graduated on time and I didn't take any time off, and I learned what I learned and I passed the bar. So, you know, those were all good things, and those were things that happened during that time. And then I lived in Malibu for years after that. And so, I knew some famous people because I was partying with them, but then I knew a whole lot more in sobriety because, like AA and Malibu's like the Oscars, it's like everyone's there. Or do you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
So that was that was that part of my life. Personally, though, that was when my dad it's really sad. I don't talk about it a whole lot, but he never got physically better. And it got to be really hard where he was in his bed. I mean, he couldn't move. And my mom took care of him to the very end. And I mean, she was not good to me personally a little bit during that time, verbally. But I mean, at this point, it's like almost no one would have stayed with our family and with him. I mean, it was not at all what she signed up for. I mean, he was handsome, she was beautiful. They had their whole lives in front of them. And she's had, I think she'd say, a great life, and it was way different from what she thought. So I experienced a lot of that as like difficult and even abusive, but it was always like, and I always kind of understood. And then, especially now as an adult, I really appreciate it. It's sort of like, how could anyone do any better? But that was going on during that time. So to some extent, it was my best adaptation to what I was experiencing is just so awful in my own life. And so it was, it was also, it's like, like I think it's dissonance, or where you have two, it's kind of like how MK Ultra victims and survivors will explain like the trauma. It's like you have like like if you're young, you have a parent, and the parent loves you, or they're supposed to, or you think they will, and then they're also incredibly abusive. And so that wasn't what my experience was. I'm not saying that, but you have like these two things, and you can't make them make sense together. And so you break in certain ways. And so kind of in that same kind of idea, not the same thing. I want to be clear, not the same thing. But the same kind of idea was that it was like in this one world, which was, where there was a lot of success and wealth and fun and opportunity. And then on the other hand, there was poverty and difficulty and, and then pain and just like incredible sadness. And they were both kind of going on at the same time. So, and I didn't understand it that way at the time. That's kind of a reflection on it. But all of that was going on. And I graduated in 1992. So I'm old, that was a long time ago. And then my dad passed away the next year. So, that part was all really hard. And I wasn't even especially present for a lot of that. I wasn't gone. I was visiting and I was home a lot, but at that point, my sister was much more helpful and involved. And then my mom, of course, was taking care of him. So that was law school.
Yeah, that's a lot to go through. But it does, I think too, one of the misconceptions in society that's really toxic is we are sort of trained, because most people that are in a career in general, like there's an etiquette almost of how you're allowed to show up for work, or like how you're allowed to be. And so people assume that, oh, if you're wearing a suit, or if you're in law school, or if you're a lawyer, or if you're doing something that society tells you to admire, that life is good, and it shows the polarity of how, like, on one end too, going back to sort of like the duality, like you're in this career path that most people like either wouldn't even try to go down, or else if they do, like a lot of people fail the bar exam. It's a very hard career path to go down. So like you're crushing it at this and getting through it, and on the other hand, like you're going through an addiction problem simultaneously, which seem like total polar opposite uh actions or paths for somebody to go down.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But I wasn't experiencing it as successful. I was actually feeling like my internal feeling was um, like failure and disappointment and shame, actually, that I should have been doing better, and that I should have like just generally, like I should have had it better together. And And then I was also this is only with hindsight, really, but I was dissociating even then quite a bit, and it was hard because I was having difficulty with time. Like it would not like I wouldn't have really good continuity with time, and it was affecting my accountability on things, and it was making it that part difficult too. Um, I didn't understand any of that as such at the time. Um, but yeah, I mean, I did not feel like I was crushing it. I
But I mean,
definitely did
you
not
got
feel
you got
that.
through it. Like I don't know how many other people could do what you did, So even if it was a struggle, really
Yeah,
amazing that you were able to do all of that under all of those conditions that you were under.
yeah, I did. So Carrie, your guest who was on not that long ago, talked about like being able to like show up and not be really prepared and still put it all together enough. So it would be sort of like that. Um, like I might have been passing where I should have been excelling, and I should have been, or I could have been doing some other stuff. So I was experiencing it as something that was relatively easy for me versus most of the other people, and that I was getting by on the fact that most of it came more naturally to me than most of the others, to put it that like that. Um,
That makes sense.
and and just sort of like this sense that I was going to have to figure out what I was going to do, but I didn't know what it was going to be. And then meanwhile, just keep doing stuff. So I'm going to keep going to class. Then I need to pass the bar. I'm going to stay sober. I'm going to do I'm going to pass the things that I need to pass. Um, and then at some point I got to figure out how it's going to all be put back together, but I never, at least that part of it, the law career part of it, I never really um, put that part together in a way that that made like a that where there's a line that makes sense, where you go like, well, you went to school and you studied this, and then you went there and then you did this. It kind of went in a completely different direction. So um
That makes
yeah,
sense.
I mean, that was that part of my life.
At what point did you meet the woman who's now your ex-wife?
Right. So that was 1998, I think.
And what year
So
did
it
you
was,
graduate?
pardon,
What year was it that you graduated from law school?
92. Yeah,
92. Okay.
92. Took the bar. And and then what I did end up doing, so I didn't I worked a little bit in law, but I mainly, and even then it was in entertainment. But I did I was mainly working just kind of like as an assistant for Paramount, basically, Paramount Pictures, and doing a few things. So, but it was like production assistant, gopher, driving stuff around kind of thing. And I lived in Malibu, so like it was back when we deliver film and dailies and scripts and stuff like that. So it's like right before the internet is really going. And so I could make money just on the way home because there was usually stuff that had to be delivered to people who lived out there. So, but it was that, it was nothing like, the beginning of like a career. And it was early sobriety for me. And so I was working with, that was how I got the jobs and how I knew the people in the first place. It's also kind of like a big part of my story, so we'll talk about it later. I've never done anything where I was really special in a way. Like, to the extent that I'm special, it's that I managed to be always around interesting, important, special, powerful people. But it's not me. I'm just kind of there. So anyway, I was there up until I think 97 or so. So I lived in LA and in Malibu, from that area, from 85 to, I don't know, around 97, I think, 96 maybe. And then I moved to San Diego to start a business with someone I was in high school, that I went to high school with. That was kind of short-lived. It's its own thing. I'm not really prepared to talk about it. I don't think it adds much, but if it did, I'm happy to talk about it. But that was what brought me to San Diego. But I was still going to AA, and specifically in La Jolla. And so one night I was working in La Jolla at that time, and I went to a big meeting at the Presbyterian Church there, regular meeting. And when I think before I even got there, though, I realized that it was foggy, and I think I had driven and I left my lights. I forgot to turn my lights off, so I had a dead battery. So I think I went to the meeting knowing that I had a dead battery, but I figured, well, this is a big meeting. There'll be somebody with jumper cables. I didn't have them with me, get my cards. So go to the meeting, talk to people afterwards. Can't find anybody who has jumper cables, right? So my ex comes up to me and she's like, or, I think she introduced herself or something. And, she's all like, well, I said, well, I need to find some jumper cables because I got to start my truck. And she said, I have jumper cables. I was like, wow, that's amazing. Okay. So that's how we met, because she had jumper cables and none of the guys did. So that's how we met. And it was early sobriety for her, and that's her story to tell. But she had been, I can't hear you. Are you saying anything?
Nope, just listening.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing cues. So but I can tell a little bit of it. I want to be fair. So she was, I'll say this much. She was there in between the first part of her time at UC Berkeley and the second part of her time at UC Berkeley. So I think of them as like Berkeley 1 and Berkeley 2, and then I met her in between. And so what happened is, and it's impressive, so she was at UC Berkeley on a full academic scholarship too. So that's a top school, and that's a fact. But she also was in San Diego because she had failed out. So she was on full scholarship, full academic scholarship, and also failed out. And she failed because of like incompletes. And it had to do with her own problems with either alcohol or whatever. And so somehow she had found herself down in San Diego, and she was, this is where like some of it gets kind of like name drop kind of stuff, but which I definitely don't want to do. But if I say it, it's because it's probably because it's important. She was working down there as a nanny, and she was working for a UCSD professor, and then also for the Jacobs family, and they were the ones that owned Qualcomm, so which is a big company, cell phone company. Um, Someone in that family. So that's where we were, but it was early sobriety. We hit it off. I fall in love. I think she's awesome, and so that's that. She eventually gets, and she was in a little bit of trouble there with the law too. So she gets that kind of cleared up. She got her record expunged, and stayed sober and got letters that said as much. And she got herself readmitted to Berkeley, where she had been going to school, and got all of the bad marks off of her record, and then finished with straight A's basically. So she graduated at the top. I think they call it high honors there, but and in that time had decided that she wanted to go to graduate school, specifically to study psychology, and very specifically to study it in the area of education and the subject of motivation. And we dated continuously during that time, so which was a few years. And in that time, I got interested in what she was doing too, and I was all in on it. So on the relationship and what she was thinking to do with her career, and she'd kind of put it together in a way that I hadn't. So it made a lot more sense. The grades were top. Her interest was specific, and she'd identified a specific place and person with whom she wanted to study. It was at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And so she went there, and then I followed her there. We were married in 2003, and then our first child was born in 2005. While there, she applied for and got, and there's a lot that goes into that, into even just that. But with her main advisor, the person she went to study with, a rather big NSF grant, so National Science Foundation. It was, I think, $1.5 million. It was over $1 million, and I was involved in that in a small way. So I was a small part of that big grant, working on databases. So, and then what happened is when they made, so she and her advisor had made their last grant proposal, and it was, they call it funded. So they're like, yep, you can do it. The person that she was studying with died unexpectedly at like age 50 on a big bike ride. Yeah. And he was a significant enough scholar that, that's like that we moved to Michigan to be there specifically to do it. So it was, devastating. It was completely unexpected. But it also meant that, and then so a few things had to happen though because of it. So then it became like it was really hers. So it wasn't hers before. It was based on research she was doing, but it was his project, but it became hers. But she hadn't even graduated yet. And they don't let just anyone be in charge of a project like that. Has to be a professor. And so actually someone from a smaller school, Eastern Michigan, got a job at University of Michigan. So he got like promoted several levels up, and it was so that they could keep the project. So, I mean, he got basically promoted just to keep that project. And then all of that research was being done in Orange County, California, even though we were in Michigan. So when we came to UCI, she graduated in 2007 and then immediately started as a professor, which is also you're not usually able to do that. So she went straight from, PhD to professor.
Brad, can I ask real quick, and maybe you don't have an answer for this, but do you know why some of these things happened? Like, could you tie it potentially to somebody that she knew? Like, how did some of that transpire, just in your opinion, even if you don't fully know, or you don't
mean how did he die?
So your ex was in her career path, she seemed to have climbed ladders a lot faster and in ways that were almost seemingly impossible for most other people to, the way that she did. Would you credit that to her being connected, or why do you think that she was sort of able to move through these barriers that a lot of people run into?
Right. So those are really good questions. And I would say that those are things worth, if anyone were to look at it, that would be a thing worth investigating, because I don't know. So, we'll get to it a little bit later, but this is someone who was not honest with me ultimately. But before that, she was. I mean, we were in sobriety, and honesty was a big part of what we were doing. We used to call it cash register loyalty. Like if somebody gave you the wrong change, is it that kind of honesty? And we actually had it come up. So I think she's very, very smart. I mean, there's no question about that. And she's also a professional actor, and then this is just as a general observation aside, people underestimate actors. So the one I think of is the Johnny Depp, Amber Heard, thing. And people tend to see it on one side or the other where the merits are. And then people also will talk about and then this is especially on one side, but they'll say well, Johnny Depp is a good actor and Amber Heard is not as good an actor or whatever, something like that. But the thing that I don't think people appreciate is they're both professional actors and they're good. And you can debate about who's better and the rest of it, but it's a certain skill and it's not easy. It takes talent. And then the people who are good at it, they spend a lot of time doing it. And they're not just the ones you think of, the people who read the news to you on TV, they're actors and they're good. And so people underestimate that. So she was a professional actor, a very good one. And she's also really smart. In fact, I can't even think of another, SAG performer, Screen Actors Guild. You can look her up on IMDb. That's also a tenured professor at a R1 university. It's just, you have to give credit where it's due. Now, having said that, that's also somebody who's, also an actor when she's with the people that she's working with, when she's presenting in classes. It's a lecture that's given by an actor. It's a meeting where an actor is one of the people participating in it. And she was a young, female co-ed too, talking to professors. And not even that there's necessarily anything untoward. I don't know. But, older guys like to be in the presence of younger women, even if they're not touching them. So I don't know. It didn't hurt, didn't hurt. But it was not for nothing. And then I'll talk about it more later, but I feel like she really broke. And a lot of times I feel like I'm talking about someone, I'm not talking about the same person, I'm talking about the person back then. And it's kind of important for me too, because I was working with her and I was studying the things she was studying, and I bought into it. And part of my frustration is that she's living opposite what, not just what we talked about, but what she published. I mean, there's stuff in journal articles, and she's not consistent with what she's written and published. So these are difficult things. As far as the person who died, his name was Paul Pentrich. Um, he was still fairly young. I think he was 50, but he had put together quite a bit of work in the area of motivation and was well respected. So there were other people who were at that university at the time that were kind of studying near or with him.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's, we were talking a little bit before we started recording just about how close to some of these fires that you were, and how she
Right.
seems to be diving into them sometimes unknowingly. And you guys sort of, in hindsight, you can look back and be like, oh my goodness, there are all these things, that like I just didn't even ask a question about. And it's like there are definitely a lot of like you said, things worth investigating for people listening.
Right. Or just to keep an open mind, because
Yeah.
lot of the so a lot of the interviews that you've had, so I'll listen to them generally. I'll be like, wow, that's an amazing experience. It's not really like what I experienced, but then there'll be cities and places and then things, and I'll think like, man, I was in that place, or I was over there too, or I know the same thing. So there is a lot of that. And it may be that I just keep happening to be around other things that are going on. I don't know that so much. But it is a part of it. So I do like to I've gotten to a point where, so the biggest thing would be this. Might as well just like put this on the table, and then it's something that can be kind of considered or discussed. So the biggest thing that's like that, I think, is that my ex, her name's Anne-Marie, and it's McAvoy. That was her maiden name, and that's the name she's using now, and that's the name she used when she was acting. And my last name's Conley. So it was Anne-Marie Conley while we were married. But she was born in Walnut Creek. She moved to Ireland with her parents when she was a week old, because her dad was an Irish national. She lived in Dublin until she was 6 years old. She moved from there to Orange County, which is where her mom was from, Laguna Beach. And she went, as I understand it, she went straight to Hollywood. So then it was from Orange County to LA all the time, daily, or, however frequently you do it, auditions and that kind of thing. So she was a child actor and a young one. She was contemporary with Drew Barrymore and Heather O'Rourke and others. So she was auditioning for some of the same things, and she was doing, I think she did some voiceovers for some of them, and was in that business. So at 6, 7 years old, when she was 8, she was the little girl in Children of the Corn, and then you could look her up on IMDb, but she's in a bunch of other stuff. So, so one of the biggest things that comes up is, what was there anything that was happening then that explains what I've experienced and then what we've all experienced kind of here, which includes our 3 children. And it's, we talked about this a little bit, Emma. I want to be really honest and transparent. I also want to be appropriate and respect people's privacy and not tell other people's stories, and so it can be a little bit tricky because it's my story too, at some point. But that would be, so that's the thing, what happened, generally or specifically, but what happened and how does that explain what's going on now, and to what extent does it matter? Um, but the more I learn and the more people um, that I hear, especially people you interview, it's one of the reasons why, like I've said things like, the MK Ultra survivors you've interviewed have saved my life, I think. I mean, they really have. And in a few different ways. One of them is it gives me some insight to some of the things that could have been happening that ended up affecting my family, my life. Other ones are, it's incredible to me what they have gone through and survived. And it's more than I did. So, it helps so they help me because, well, if they can do it, I can do it. Right. And then also, like, well, it doesn't make sense to even take the position of a victim and feel sorry for myself because, why would I want to do that? It's like, it's kind of silly put next to this other thing. And anyway, it doesn't make sense to be miserable when they're happy, given what they went through. It's like, so that would be like one of the big elephants, I guess, if you put it that way, to discuss how to discuss it. And also I have children. So I have 3 kids. They're 13, 16, and 18 now. So they're older now, but this is their mom. So I guess maybe she'll see this. People she knows will see it. And I want them to know, like I loved her and my commitment was real. There were some tragic things that happened that were external. She had an injury and some other things that caused things to go sideways. So when I say she lied about me, and that's a lie she's maintaining, is perjury in family court. It's covered up in Orange County and at UC Irvine for sure. I also think she's a victim, probably as a child. I mean, in some ways. And then definitely this process, because so we met in AA, and in AA, though, like one of the things, at least they used to say, is you have a bottom. You have to have a bottom. You have to have a sufficient bottom. It has to get bad enough for you to say that's bad enough for me, and I don't want it to get any worse. That's the bottom. It might stay here for a while, but I'm not going to find out how much worse it could get. And so, I didn't just decide one day, I think I told, it was like I had some consequences. I had a DUI, I had this stuff, and that was it. But she never had consequences for this, for false DV, for dragging me into court, for all of that stuff when I was trying to help her. It's a really bad thing to do to a person. But she never had to, because people were covering stuff up, she never had to face the consequences. And that hurt her. I mean, it didn't help her. I don't know what she would have done. I mean, people can react to that lots of different ways, but I know when she did it once before, she ended up getting sober, getting back into Berkeley and getting a PhD and a job as a professor and getting married and having 3 children. She did all of those things after she had a bottom in sobriety. And she never had another bottom, so I don't know. She might have just continued to spiral down or go in a different direction. But she never had to find out. So, I loved her. She betrayed me. We're still raising children. We're still in the same community, in the same place. We know the same people. So she's a victim, and she's also an abusive person. And she's a victim of institutions in Orange County specifically.
It is a lot, and it is hard to sort of tread on that. And that's why, your story is important too. It would be to just have one of these things, but your story ties in a lot of different hypotheticals, a lot of different aspects of some of these systems, even if just indirectly, family court and, the university system are both corrupt institutions, so navigating just that, even without all the rest of the hypotheticals, those two things alone make your story really unique and incredible, that there's so much of both of those, but there's so much more, and one of the things I wanted to bring up, if you wanted to talk about it, there were two sort of non-negotiables that your wife gave you in the beginning too,
Right.
that I think sort of tie into what you just said about her past, and then moving to right now, something that you look back on now and we're like, wait a minute, that was a little bit odd.
Right. Yeah. And so many things are like, wait a minute, that was a little bit odd, because I look back on my life and with just a head full of, the Imagination podcasts and all of the people who, their testimonies, each one is kind of like giving me some information. I look back and I'm like, wait a minute, like it was totally different from what I thought. So like one, just for instance, I was at the grand opening, before the public opening, of the big MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas, the big green one.
Yeah.
And I was there with my girlfriend at the time, whose stepmom was the lawyer for the person who owned MGM at the time. Right? It's kind of a big thing. But then there were like things going on there. So like I was oblivious at the time, right? But now it's like, I think, well, wait a minute, were things a little bit different than I thought? And it's also an example of like, isn't it weird that I would even find myself there, at the party before the place opened? Anyway, the two things were, so this is very much when we're looking back on it after all of this happened, and it's much different than it was at the time, which just seemed like kind of, I mean, honestly, it's just like, yeah, of course, that makes sense. Like, I didn't think too much of it. But what it was, so when I think it was, I don't know if it was right when I asked her to marry me, or if it was a little bit before, because it definitely wasn't after, because they were deal breakers. And so it was like this. She said, I only want to get married if we're going to have children, but I don't want to have an only child. And I don't want to have 4 children. So she was one of 4. So 2 or 3. But that was how she put it. I don't want 1, I don't want 4. So 2 or 3. And I was like, well, that sounds perfect. I would like children too. And you're a nanny, or you were, and you know all about kids, and I don't. And I didn't feel like my childhood prepared me to do it well. And then, but the other one was, and she said, and our children will never, ever, ever, no matter what, work in Hollywood. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. Because, I mean, she had worked in it, and I'd kind of lived in it. And both of us were, we were sort of on like this redemptive kind of path in life. Like, hey, we found each other at our bottoms, and it's bad, but we're here, and we're alive, and we're young, and we're smart, and we're going to do some stuff, we're going to go for it. And so the idea of like Hollywood, and then just generally Hollywood, so acting in that business, it just wasn't really something to talk about. And I didn't like to talk about it much, because I don't like to talk about famous people too much, or people like that, because it makes me feel bad about myself. Like, I feel like if I put them on a pedestal, then where am I? And so I don't like it. And then the other thing was, I just lived kind of with people that did that professionally, to where it's like the last thing that people want is to do at home what they're doing at work. It's even kind of like that here at UCI. People, because I live in the community that's adjacent to it, and it's an entire zip code of, it's basically professors and families. So when people are up here, they'll talk about whatever, but people want to have like a regular life. They want to go to the park with kids. They want to do, So for those reasons, there wasn't any real attraction to anything about Hollywood. We were doing totally different things. But now, like given what happened and the way that it broke, and then the way that it is now, and the position that I feel like I'm in, and a bunch of other things that I know about her stage parents and things that were said, and her siblings, a lot of stuff. And especially based on what other people have said, it makes me think a whole lot different about not Hollywood. I mean, a few things. It makes me really suspicious what happened. And like Penny Shepard has said, like, just look at her filmography on IMDb. Look at the things she was in and the roles they had her playing. But man, I lost my train of thought. I knew it was going to happen.
No, you're okay. We were just talking about her path as, this almost dual life in a sense, where you didn't really think a lot about it until later on when you started learning,
I remember what it was. Yeah. Sometimes it's like I lose the train of thought, but sometimes it's like, it's not just like I can't remember what I was going to say. It's like I really wanted to say that because I felt like it was important.
Yeah.
And that was this kind of train. So the thing that I didn't want to forget was the other thing it made me think is like she was a good mom before she wasn't. And she really was. I mean, she really was. So, which makes it even more tragic and sad. But for whatever reason, she had a sense that that was super important. For whatever it was, whether it was because of some kind of abuse or just that she thought that that all added up, that that's no place for a child, just because, I mean, if it's bad enough to watch it, imagine how bad it is to make it. So I don't know, but she did that. It's also one of the things that here, can I just like for a minute tell you something, just because it kind of came up and I don't think it would otherwise. So she even went back on that herself. So she ended up going back and acting one more time because she was a recurring character on Full House. I think she was on 4 episodes, so not part of the regular cast, but on it. And she has the distinction of being the only character in Full House that they talked about more than was on screen. So I think she feels like she should have gotten some royalties for it because they were always talking about her, even though she wasn't on the show.
Wow.
But anyway, she even, so not only like she didn't want her own children to go in it. And that was what we talked about. We didn't ever talk about her ever doing it again because she totally quit. I mean, she retired before she went to high school. And then while at high school, she helped start Orange County School of the Arts. It's called OSHA. It's big now. It's also the school that Allison Mack went to,
Nexium track.
Exactly. Yeah, she went to her high school. But anyway, so she had totally retired. So we weren't even thinking she would do it. But in 2016, after all of, after I discovered what I discovered and the crazy stuff, it's before the divorce though, she went and she appeared in an episode of Fuller House. And that she wasn't going to do. And it was really weird that she did it because she had been reclusive on top to saying she never wanted to do that again. And the creator of the show was this guy, had been badgering her for a while. And I didn't think that much of it, but she was telling me like he keeps calling me because they had started that show back up. And we didn't talk about it much. I don't like talking about it. So I didn't discuss it much, but she'd say, Jeff, gosh, what's his name? Now I'm forgetting it. It doesn't matter. His first name is Jeff, whatever his name is. But he's the creator of the show, Full House and Fuller House. And he was just badgering her. That's what she was saying, is calling her. And then so finally she said she was going to do it. And I thought, well, all right. And then she did, but she was doing the things that she said she wasn't going to do. And then just as a weird thing, whatever that guy's name is, Jeff, he owned, I just found this out in the last few months, but I found out he owned 150 Cielo Drive, which is the house. So he owned for 20 years, he owned the house where the Manson murders were, where Sharon Tate was murdered, where Roman Polanski was in front of it with her blood on the door, taking a picture for Life magazine. And I think our friend Dana, she's doing great research on that now. I mean, it's sort of just like a tangent, kind of weird way that my world connects with a different world. But like that guy, Jeff, he was good. Franklin, that's the guy. Yeah, Jeff Franklin, that guy. So Jeff Franklin, he was also really, really good friends with Bob Saget. And if you know about Bob Saget, then there's that whole thing. And these people are all on the set. It's also the sound stage where Friends was filmed, and Matthew Perry just died, and what happened with that. But they would call it the Lucky Soundstage because, there's Full House, which was a big hit. Then immediately, the next thing was Friends. And then when Friends wrapped, then Fuller House goes on. And then I think it was the Oval Office for West Wing too. Which there's lots of sound stages and all kinds of junk. Very few things, would be not necessarily good, but big enough to where we would talk about it and you would know what I was talking about. So, maybe it's just kind of interesting, but to me, it's weird that this guy who hasn't done much, except for he was the creator of Full House, had enough money to have, a home that I think it's like $50 million or something. I mean, in the end, what it sold for. How does this guy have that house and what's he doing and what's the deal? Because there's the stuff that gets made and it's on TV, but then there's all the other stuff, whatever it is that they're doing in between. So, that's something to look into if somebody wants to. I don't know. Or maybe I don't know. Just seems weird to me that of all people, Bob Saget's buddy is the one who owns that house that's that expensive. And he's the guy who came up with Full House. It's just weird to me.
That is a crazy story. You do have just all these overlapping things. And going back to those two ultimatums that your wife gave, in the beginning, and how much different they can sort of appear now in hindsight. And so you guys ended up actually having 3 kids. So talk about maybe when did things start to change for the worse? When did you start to notice, oh my gosh, this doesn't feel like the person that I married? And maybe walk us through what led to the divorce.
Yeah. So when we moved to UC Irvine, and she took the position. So that was 2007. We'd been married about 4 years. We bought our first house, which was part of moving here. And we had our first child, Kevin, who was born in Michigan, and he was born early. So, which is a really important part of our story too. So he's born at exactly 32 weeks. He was 3 pounds, 15 ounces. He was small. He was tiny. And we didn't expect, so the early birth was, there were some complications in the pregnancy, but there was no expectation of an early birth, but they were trying to extend it as long as possible. So we went to the hospital, and, fortunately we were at the university and we were really close, and, they either saved his life or saved him from, bad outcomes, and he's great. So he was I think about 2.5. Well, let's see. He was about two just over 2 when we moved here. And my wife was pregnant with our second of 3 children. So that's our daughter. So, God, what did you ask me? I'm so sorry.
Oh no, you're good. You're answering it. Just sort of leading up to when did things sort of start to change?
Oh,
But
yeah,
yeah,
thank
thank
you.
you. I think we had left off before. You had only talked about one
Right.
child being born. So thank you for walking through the timeline of the other
Yeah.
children.
Yeah. So we get to Irvine with 1 child, and she's pregnant with our second of 3. And we know that she's pregnant, but they don't know. So so that even explains like how we end up with a home and not something else in the first place. So we prioritized. So we knew that we had 1, but we knew that we were going to have at least 1 other child, and that she was going to be working as a professor. So we didn't know that for sure when Kevin, our first, was born. And so at that point, we had 2 basic ideas. Like we could do more professional kind of life, work 2 careers, pay other people to help raise our children, do it like that. And a lot of people here do. Or something more traditional and conventional where one parent is staying at home. And then the unusual part, but not as much as it used to be, was that it was me who was doing it. And it all kind of worked because, we could do everything from shopping to go to school, to take the children to school, to work. And it was all in walking distance because it was all right here on campus. So she started her work at the end of 2007 as an assistant professor. And to do that, at that point, if you're on the kind of course that she was, then where you want to get to is tenure. Like you want to have tenure, which is guaranteed kind of employment as a professor. And at that point in the US, usually like in the UC system, then you're an associate professor if you can get there. And then there's, full professor after that. So we start with, she's going to work really hard. Like we're really focused on that. We're also raising children. And then I was doing work that was kind of supporting that while taking care of the children. And we were able to make it all kind of go because the homes are subsidized on the campus, which is another thing maybe to talk about, but I won't do that here. So she starts off and she's doing really well in her career and her work. She's writing with a couple other young women, moms, professors, and doing the kinds of things you do. You get an office, you have to teach classes, you're expected to do research and publish journal articles and that kind of thing. And so she's doing that kind of thing, and doing it well and happily. And, it seems pretty normal. She was always kind of like high strung. And that's maybe not the right way to put it. She was always extroverted and high energy. So she experienced life that way. And then so for me, that was a positive thing at the time for me because I was more quiet and introverted and reserved, and I didn't need that kind of energy. So it made it easier for me. So I appreciated that. So that's an example of like something good I can say. It's actually something that really worked against me at the end. But, it made it easy for me because then I could just kind of be chill and let her carry the social weight, which if you're very attracted to that kind of thing, you might fight for that kind of attention, but for me, that was a nice thing. I was kind of happy to be, I was there. It wasn't like I wasn't showing up. It was just, I had a wife and she was very good socially, and I was happy to let her kind of do that. But it was kind of on the manic side at times. And it could be a little bit much, I think. And I want to be fair, so I'm not meaning to be insulting. And then, so the years go by. A few years go by. She does, I think, quite good work. She's generating a lot of work for other students too, because we came to UCI. Like almost nobody comes to a university straight from graduate school with money and work to do. So we came from Michigan with like whatever part was there of a $1.5 million grant, which over half of it goes to the school. So they started by getting more from us than they were giving. Just something I always forget. But even more than that, it's like it's funding like work in this case, which was like surveys and different things. And all of that was work for graduate students. And there are graduate students who are, whatever you think of education, what they're doing is they're here to learn. And to do it well, you need real work and real research. And so it was all of that. My part of it was working with the data and the databases. And I took it really seriously, not just the work itself, but that it mattered. Because I bought into it. I thought this is what we're doing. So my career's kind of embedded in hers a little bit too, for what it's worth. But so it went like that for a few years, but she did. I'm going to I might cross some lines. I kind of hope I don't. I'll try not to. I don't think I am. But so she had depression and anxiety, and these were things that were treated with medication. So as that goes, this would be true of many people in the United States today. They're like, maybe more people than not, for all I know, but nothing unusual, but that was a part of what was going on. But then specifically, she was having a hard time dealing with, I think, the depression, especially, but she was having a hard time dealing with having the right medicine for how she was experiencing life while in this kind of stressful time, which was, as a new mom and also a professor. And so, and the way she explained it to me was that her thinking had to be sharp to do the job that she did, which I think is true. And that the medication that worked for, I think it was her depression, made her mind dull in a way where it wouldn't be a problem unless the work you did was for how you think, and it had to be at a high level. And so what she started doing, this goes somewhere. So what she started doing, and she'd been doing it pretty much all the while, but she was running, like distance running, jogging. And so she started not taking medicine or not taking that medicine because she felt like she couldn't do the job. And then making up for it with hard exercise. So like endorphins and that kind of thing. So like a pro-health kind of thing to try to do. And that was good. It actually worked, and I supported it, and I did, in every way that I could. But she got to a point where she was running so many miles, it was hard to have enough time to do it. And then also she was starting to break down, like her body was starting to, because it was a lot of like marathon running, or training for marathon running. So then she got into yoga and really got into it, and then kind of manically got into it. And then so one day, this will also give you an idea how it goes. So we had one truck. So we were really living kind of like one career kind of in this place where we work and live in the same place. So it's kind of like a base or a movie lot or something. It's a campus. And so we were sharing it. We just had one truck, and the truck needed to take the kids to school, but she was doing yoga, and she was starting to do more than one class a day, like 90-minute classes. And the first one was at 6 a.m. And in order to make it work, she had to be back. She couldn't mess around afterwards, and she had to go back. And then I would have the kids totally ready to go with their lunches packed to go to Montessori school. So she'd have to, if she was late, we were late. So it was all on time. So like on this last day, she gets hurt doing yoga. But before she gets hurt, like I get up, I make her a triple cappuccino, right? And she's out the door to yoga. Then I get the kids up, then I pack their lunches, and and then I serve them breakfast. And then all three of us go to school, and it's in Fountain Valley, Huntington Beach. But anyway, that day at yoga, she tore, it was a labral tear. It's a hip injury. It's a sports injury. And it's, I think, kind of unusual, painful, and almost impossible to do. So she pulled her femur out of her hip a little bit, and it tore, the thing that holds it. So it was a bad injury. She didn't do anything wrong, really. It was getting hard to be with her because it was kind of like manic. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, like a bit much. Like, hey, can I go to another yoga class? I have like 2 kids or 3, I guess, at that time. And she's busy and I'm busy. She's not doing anything wrong, I mean, another way of looking at it is she's trying to find a way to do all of the things that she feels like she has to do. I have to do my job well, or I'm not going to get tenure. If I don't get tenure, we don't get to keep our house either. So it's high stakes. And then for me, if she's not able to do that, then that affects me too. So then I'm trying to support her as best I can. But anyway, she came back, she was hurt. Took a long time to figure out what was going on. Insurance companies totally screwed us over. That's kind of a big story for another time, but we sued them. Took a while, should have been more, should have been different, because she was also a difficult client. But we, which was her, ended up getting $216,000 net cash. And that was when she basically said, well, she got tenure too. And then she said, F you, like, you can go now. And I was like, wait, what? Like, we were doing this whole thing. And I knew things were kind of bad. Okay, but what happened? So she got hurt. And also we didn't know it until the next day. So she came back, it was like, I kind of hurt my leg or something. And she went on with her day. And then when she woke up the next morning, she couldn't get out of bed. So it was weird, or it was really hard, it was painful. So she ended up having surgery finally, which was what was needed. It's arthroscopic, but it's in the hip. It's not good. And then there was like 4 months of rehab. And there was like a continuous motion machine she was on so that it would heal properly, all kinds of stuff. And I was taking care of her and the kids while this was going on. Then she rehabbed it, and then she was experiencing it as pain, but it wasn't getting better. And so, we didn't know what was going on. So she kept rehabbing it. It kept hurting. And then it took a long time that they finally looked at it, and there were like spurs, there were like bone spurs. So all of her rehab was just ripping it because it wasn't healed properly. And the reason for that was because they didn't get the surgery done early. Since she had to have another surgery and another rehab, and she never recovered fully from it. And she was like in amazing health. See, these are ways in which she was a victim. And I was doing everything I possibly could to help her, including with the lawsuit, taking care of the kids, all of that. And lots of people know this. I mean, I'm saying this. You can ask my neighbors and lots of people. So I was doing it. I was happy to do it. It was my sweetheart. And one other thing, Emma, too. She, at that time, so this would be a long answer, and it's also the answer to, when did it come apart? So, there was a time where, so she was reclusive, like, meaning she barely left the master bedroom for over a year. I barely even left the room. So I was taking care of our kids, and I was trying to take care of her. I was talking to my closest friends, one of whom was a psychologist, a professor, and a very, very good one. I mean, a very, like I'm saying, is a good one, not like because the world says they are, but the world says they are too. Trying to figure out what to do. And one of the things was because she had been talking about like suicide and stuff. So I guess that's out there, but not like she was going to do it, more like in a really depressive and sad way. And she would say things, I mean, not a lot, but she said, I think you guys would all just be better off if I wasn't here, or I should just walk in front of a truck. There's a life insurance policy, or things like that. You're not going to want me if I can't walk, And so I had to think too, like, well, what? Because that wasn't what I was planning on, And so I decided, I thought and I decided. I mean, it wasn't like I had deliberated over it, but I mean, I thought, well, I mean, whatever it is, that's what it's going to be. I mean, we got all kinds of stuff going on. I mean, we're busy and we decided we're doing what we chose to do. And we have the children and they're awesome, right? And it's an intellectual life. And, like you could even, you can do this is a job you could actually do. And then I have my dad was in a wheelchair. I mean, that was my whole experience. And I was saying, like, look, if you can't walk, I will push you. And it was and it was meaningful to me because I'd done that already. I already knew what that was like. And I didn't feel like there was anything special about it or heroic. It was more like we were a team. If anything, you were like, you were the breadwinner, it's your job. I mean, I did appreciate that part of it. But I felt like, well, I'm on the team. And, if you're down for a while, then I'll do this. And if I have to figure some stuff out, I'll figure it out. That was how it started. And that was not the problem. The problem was more like, so she went from that to like the reclusion and the depression and doing nothing. I mean, just like in bed all day. And then what she started doing was on the computer and then playing games on the computer and then playing Minecraft on the computer on servers with people around the world. A lot of them are kids, like all kinds of people. And then really coming out of it like that and finally going to a psychologist and some other stuff. And so the way it was being sold was like, well, I'm interacting with people online to get over this reclusion. And so that kind of made sense. That's what they were doing. And I was even involving my children in it a little bit, even though like the video game stuff was something I didn't really want to do much. But I would make food and prepare it and bring it upstairs to the master bedroom and they could do games so they could have snacks and games. So they'd just do something with their mom because she was so absent from their lives. But that wasn't like where it really came apart. That's where a lot of us really got concerned. And the more it went on, the more concerned we got. When she started pushing me away and then having headphones on loud up all day and night, like sometimes for more than 24 hours straight, just straight gaming while we're doing life. Anyway, I found out that like that at least one of the relationships was significant and with a minor. And so by that, a 17-year-old from Massachusetts who was a high school student who lived with a single mom. And when I found that out, I thought that it might be a problem. So I'm devastated is the very first thing. I'm like shocked and devastated, but I'm not 100% surprised because, things have been difficult for us for a while. It was mostly that reclusion stuff. And the way she came out of it was not the way I expected. It was like different and with gaming and with other people. So like other people and not just me, not our children. So, sorry.
It's okay. Did you end
It's
up
like how
confronting her about
Yeah. So that's how it fell apart. It didn't really fall apart. I didn't even really consider it as it got bad when she got bad. I mean, when she got bad, she got bad. But the relationship didn't get bad to me. I mean, I didn't like it. It wasn't like it was fun. And it's also not like I'm perfect. But I mean, that was not that big a deal, I didn't think, in the big scheme of things. Um, I mean, I knew it was an injury and it was painful to her and those kind of things. I didn't think it was like going to end us. I mean, if anything, I would have guessed it would have brought us closer together. But but yeah, that's when it really came apart. So, the way that she was gaming so much and pushing me away was a problem. And I was really concerned because you can't keep doing that and be a professor. You can't. And then I was also concerned just because it was not healthy for her. But beyond that, I was kind of happy for her to like do what she had to do to get well, even if it was different and longer than I thought. But when I found that out, it was devastating. It was the exact moment that was the beginning of the end, the exact moment. But so I wasn't 100% surprised. I was like maybe 99% surprised because, it wasn't good. But like, except for the shock, which wasn't 100% shock, the very next thing I thought was, this makes things really difficult because she was right about to get tenure, but it was at issue. And even that is a huge story. I'm definitely not going to talk about, but she was set to get tenure and the recommendation was 16-0, but she was so busy with some other stuff. She said, I'll just do it next year. And because they do them in 2-year steps, she's like, the only difference it'll make is to my title. And I don't care about that. It won't change what we make, my income. So I'll just do it next year, like that kind of, like, not really so much arrogance. It's just like the assessment was, I've cleared that bar by enough that it's no big deal. And since it's just superficial, it's just a title, I don't care. And I got all these other things I have to do. I'll just do it next year. And so, and to do it, you have to get a bunch of it's like doing your taxes like times 10. You got to get all your papers and all your stuff and you present it. But they basically said, if you do that, if you just get your stuff together and give it to us, then, you can expect that you'll get to the next step. And that's the big step because you get tenure. So once the shock was by me, I mean, like a second or two, I think, I'm thinking, oh crap, what are we going to do? Because we're years into this and I'm fully invested. I mean, at this point, I'd gotten into Montessori education and how it related to our kids. And so my career and what I wanted to do. So as much as I didn't know what I wanted to do, like when I was telling you about law school, I very much did from then to now, really. And if it had to do with just one single thing, it would be Montessori education. But it has to do with a whole lot of things. But I thought, what are we going to do? Because I got to get, when she'd gone up for tenure a second time, she was denied. And the vote was 7 that were for her, 8 were against her, and 5 abstentions. So we went from unanimous to everybody's all over the place. And there was an interim dean and an interim everything. And there was all kinds of upheaval everywhere. So that was a big question. And because so much was riding on it. And so then that became like my predominant thought. So it was like, how could you do this? But also, and even more than that, how could you do this when everything, especially our children, depend on your job, the one that we've all been working on, even if you've been working the hardest, we did this all together. How could you do that, that particular. And I thought that if the administration at UCI knew that it would be a huge problem, and maybe one that couldn't be overcome. I was also concerned about whether it was illegal. So from then to now I realize, I don't think anybody cares about anything half of the time. So she didn't have any consequences for any of that. And I didn't really want her to, I was trying to get help to her, or get her to help, mainly. And I don't even like talking about it now. There's no real upside for me, but I have felt for a long time that she maintains lies about me, and I keep her secrets even still sometimes, which is really weird.
Talk about that.
But that's, yeah,
I said, walk us through. So that all happened, and you just mentioned that she was making up lies about you. Talk about that part and like what led up to it, and like what ultimately you were accused of.
Yeah. So right before we get there, I have to figure out what to do. So I find this, I find this text that's on a phone. That's what I realize what's going on, and kind of find out a little bit more about it. And then kind of quickly confront her with two other people. And we'd said it at the time, so I always remember it, but we did it with no judgment and unconditional love. And that was the message. We really wanted to help her. And at that time, the big concern had been just the gaming itself, which was like in an addictive manner, like that's all you're doing. So, and what I'd hoped when we did that is that she would like go to a program. Basically, the idea was like get her out of this rut and into a place where she can get whatever's wrong back kind of right, and she'll have a family there supporting her. And I expected it to go somehow like that, but it didn't. So she just took the position that I didn't know what was going on, that I wasn't telling, that these were our friends and that they didn't know the truth about it. And that she was working with the therapist, and the whole Minecraft thing was, being done with a therapist who knew what was going on. And so she was having none of that offered help. And one is a colleague, there are people who are here, people who are here now. So what I didn't, so a little bit of time goes on where we're like at least kind of dancing around, working things out. And I actually would have called her parents at the time, except for they were in Belgium, which is like how I was the only one really taking care of these children, which I was super happy to do. But so a lot of this I found out later. So I didn't know this at the time it was happening, or I would have done something different, or I didn't fully understand it. But so she was framing me for domestic violence, but she was doing it all during the year, like 2017, or the end of 2016 and 2017. I don't know this at the time. I find out about it later. And she's an actor and she's clever, she's really good. So she didn't like go and like make reports. She was just like, she would go into the police and ask for information about domestic abuse, and if you got hurt and what you would do and who to call in an emergency. And then the other thing she was doing was gaslighting me super hard, which is a singular experience to get gaslit by a professor and actor. So she was trying to convince, so she would say things like, I went to the police and you know what I found out? They have, like, for abusers, they have an emotional abuse scale, like a measure. Just like what you could say. And it has 20 questions. That's why I didn't know that. And she would say something like, yeah, so I did it, and you got all 20. And you're like, what? Come on. So things like that. But so I'm getting gaslit. It's really difficult at home. And then I found out later she'd been kind of like framing me, I guess, saying bad things about me to colleagues. But like meantime, I'm like taking our children to school every day, and I'm taking them to their pediatrician, and I'm playing with them at the park, and I'm, making their dinner and their breakfast. And, I'm like doing everything with them in the community where the people we live with or the people that we work with. So I also, even after I found that out, I wasn't that worried about it. I was actually more worried about the fact that she's a professor and it wasn't honest. And that those two things were a problem for our family, because I was thinking, I almost wanted to be careful because I felt like the evidence, and it was so obvious and it was so overwhelming. Like, I don't know it's going to be so corrupt. And I don't know that the school's going to have such big motivations to, to whitewash and just kind of ignore my case. I didn't know at the time. So I was also kind of like thinking, I got everything. I got all the goods. Like, I have everything. I don't need to be crazy about it. And also, I'm trying to deal with this person. And I'm mindful that I'm a dad, and so that I'm in the percentage, that's in that. And I also know that I'm married to an actor, So it got worse over 2007. I thought maybe, for a lot of that time, I thought maybe, we'd be able to work it out one way or the other. Because for a lot of the time, it was like there was they were like mental problems or mental illness or some combination of it. But that whatever that was, if it was put right, then other things would be right too. So that's what she did. So, and then, like, really quickly, the way it happened was that, so her parents were in Belgium for almost 2 years doing international, opening office in not Brussels, but the other city, starts with an L. I think Leuven, maybe. No, can't remember. But so they were there, and but they weren't there permanently. So they came back from Belgium in November, right before Thanksgiving in 2017. In less than a week here, my ex called the police. So when she calls police, she calls her university's police. So they're like full police. They're state police, actually. But they're also not, with their allegiances to the university mainly. So she calls basically her police, and they come to the house. And then she talks about how she's afraid of domestic violence and where are our children and all of this stuff. But it's like acting. But the police showing up don't know this. And I'm like watching the whole thing. So that happens. And then she did it again on December 29th. And then and each time, this is documented and recorded, and there's police reports, and people said what they said, and there's all kinds of things, even audio of it. So then she called again 6 weeks later. And, oh, by the way, like, it's really difficult in the home at this point. She's already called the police, and I'm raising our children, and she's involved in other relationships, and I'm taking care of the kids. So it's weird to be in the house. It's really hard at that time. So that was the time, really, once her parents got there and with calling the police, she was really trying to break me hard. But she's also calling the police and doing that stuff too. So then December 29th, or no, is that it? Yeah, I think that was it. She calls them again, and basically they say, look, there's nothing going on. We don't know what the deal is, but you can't keep calling the police. So we're going to have CPS come by. And so my heart, So my heart sinks a little bit because I think, well, CPS is not good. I know that that's not something I was planning on. And so that was that. It was over the holidays. So we had separate holidays with the kids that winter. And when they came back with her on the 2nd, I think it was on the 1st or the 2nd, like school started early that year. So it was either the 2nd or the 3rd. They were at school, came home. So it was the first night, getting them ready for bed. And then, so my ex, she like is gone. She leaves for the night. It was the weirdest thing. So she had like a rolling suitcase. And I was sitting down with our 2 youngest and we were having dinner. It's like mac and cheese. And like the leftovers were going to be lunch. So like, that's what we were doing. And she came downstairs and she just went on a date, like out the door or whatever, like dressed up, which was unusual. So, or I wasn't accustomed to that. So then she was gone. And then like 5 or 10 minutes later, there's a knock at the door and I go and it's CPS, right? And it's night. So yeah. So I'm like, my 2 youngest are behind me. I think Kevin had finished eating and he was somewhere. And I have this woman, and she turns out she's like the best government employee, I think, in my whole story. That's another way mine's weird. This is somebody who turns out to be a good person, I think. Her name's CJ, but I don't know her, right? She knocks on the door and she's like, what, where's your wife? And I said, well, she's not here. She just left. And she said, like, well, what do you mean she just left? I said, well, I just made dinner, was sitting down at the table eating it with, them, because like we had an entryway that went back and then like the table, you could see it. So I was having dinner with them. She's like, well, where's your wife? I'm like, well, she left like on a date or something. She's gone. So if it hadn't been like that, though, and anyway, it's what I thought at that time was like, once I got her to appreciate that, like I was okay, like come in, let's talk. That I was really glad. I thought, man, I'm so lucky, because had it been 15 minutes earlier, maybe even just 10 or 5, if it had been just a few minutes earlier, she would have knocked. The answer, my ex would have opened the door. And when she opened the door, it would have been an actor. And it wouldn't have even mattered what reality was, and it would have been good. It would have been a professional actor. And so it would have been a lot harder to overcome. Even still, I would have thought, well, everybody knows what happened. And then that was like really where there was no way back from there, because gosh, so this will be for another episode. What happened with UCI, police, and CPS, and a psychology professor for like 6 or 8 hours in front of our house on that night, because that was crazy. And I can't tell the whole thing. I just realized that there's no way in this. But what happened was it got to a point where she wanted to take the children after CPS. So CPS interviewed us. It was obvious what happened, because my kids were saying like, yeah, dad takes care of us. It's all cool. Mom's gone for the night. So, she had her report, which was, because I didn't call her. She was like, there's no abuse. You should know this. My ex ended up fighting with the CPS worker and threatened to sue her for not accommodating her disability, and never gave a report. So for all of the women out there, who I know have been like, horrible victims of, CPS in the courts. I mean, that's a part of my story too, is I'm on the other side of someone who's taken advantage of, like money and resources and sympathy meant for you guys. And at the same time, it helps confirm the things that men's rights think when they say the women are lying, they're making false. Well, some of them are, because one of them is my ex. So anyway, for what it's worth, at that point, this is the long story part. They told me to file to get a restraining order against my wife because it would help UCIPD to do their job if they had that paper. Because she was a professor and she was a homeowner, as was I. And their ability to force someone for their home or to do things when people call was limited. And so would I help them by going to the court and getting an order? So it wasn't my idea. I didn't even want to go to the court. UCIPD told me to do that. So I did it, and nobody ever talked to me. CPS said they wanted to testify. Nobody ever called CPS. I just waited. I got to the end of the day and it was just denied, my request. So I go there and I talked to the CPS worker, who I think was quite good, and checked like what I was writing, and it was accurate and it was true. So that was on the 3rd, and then on the 4th of January. And then on the 8th, which was the next Monday, OC sheriffs served my denied request for a restraining order, something I didn't even know they did, which meant I would have never said anything about it, except for OC sheriffs told my wife that I filed a restraining order that was denied, and it was a restraining order that UCI police told me to get. That's how my wife found out I went to ask for a restraining order, which I wasn't going to do. The only reason I did it is because UCI PD kept coming up to our house because of false calls, and they didn't want to do it anymore, so they called CPS. Anyway, sucks. So then she got a lawyer. She cut off my cell phone, which meant I didn't have notice, and I was with the children, no cell phone. Well, she went to court with her lawyer and lied and got a restraining order against me. And I didn't even know to appear. And I was kicked out of the house by the end of the week. Homeless. My kids wanted to come with me, the 2 youngest especially. And that was January 2018. And from then to like right this second, I've been having to operate kind of against both the family court and UC Irvine. And it sucks because almost all of it is optional. This didn't have to be this way. And I didn't get a fair hearing. I didn't get support. It's definitely there's injustice, and and it was in a tyrannical kind of way that there isn't a good explanation for it. There's explanations that add up and make sense, but to do that, it's just so stupid, or it benefits so few people at the expense of so many that it doesn't make sense. But the other thing is, it's not like my ex-wife benefited from it either. She kept her job. I mean, at this point, I hope she keeps it. It doesn't benefit me for her to lose it. The childhoods are done, mostly. The relationships are not done. I'm every bit as much their dad, and I care about him as much as I ever did, but it's different. That time we don't get back. And it was all just for whatever the reasons were, and I have a really good idea what a few of them were, the big ones. They have to do with politics and money. But there's no good reason for it at all. It doesn't make sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense unless you say like, well, how can we, work a system in a way, that benefits us, and we'll pretend like we care about the rest of the people. Other than that, it doesn't make sense. Stuff isn't that hard, and nobody benefited from it. I mean, obviously I didn't, but it's not like she's in a good position. So all these things I said, either, if they're facts, I say they're facts, or to the extent that they're true, even if I'm wrong. I mean, nobody's helped by this. That doesn't make me look good. I don't like doing it. Definitely doesn't make the person I'm talking about look good. But I think it makes UC Irvine and the court look the worst. I mean, I feel like even my ex, as horrible as she was to me, she's a victim too. And it can't be fun. She has to be in meetings with, she has to work with people who know me. And if if anyone ever, if there's ever news in Orange County that gets reported, and if someone were to ask anyone who is around us in parts of our lives, they would have to say what they think, I would think. And they might be critical of me too. I don't know. I mean, I'd hope not too much, but whatever's the truth, And the kids are such, they're such victims. There was no reason for it at all, not even none. And but fortunately, they're amazing. So I don't want anyone to think like, well, they paid the full price for it, for sure. I mean, and you just don't, if you're a child, you don't get to skate by without it affecting you in some way. But I know it's not as bad as others, and they know that too. And given all that's happened, they've done as well as I think anyone could have, like better than I would have for sure. And I know that, and better than I thought was possible. So, I'm really proud of them, and I'm very happy. I don't like being as distant from them. But I much prefer that to they're not doing well, which is a really awful thing. If you have to think that about your kids, it's sort of like much rather like know that you're good, even if it's at the expense of our relationship, hopefully for a time. And, and I expect them to evaluate me, even this. And I've had a really hard time with some stuff. So it's not like, I'm not excellent in everything I do. And I've had a really hard time with some things. But I feel like the priorities are pretty good. Like I have my priorities, the things that I value, I kind of value them in order. And, I think I do a reasonably good job, and I'm improving as a person. But I'm sure my kids think like, what the heck, man, you're a lawyer and it's been like this long. And why are you spending all day on Twitter and talking about all this stuff? And there's an answer, but,
You want to talk about that? Because that's how I found you, and you do a lot of advocacy work on there. Maybe talk about like, what made you want to go public to begin with? Why did you start a Twitter account? And maybe talk about the one that you started that I found you on.
I did not want to go. The very last thing I wanted to do was go public. Even now, when I first was aware that we had problems, in our home, and really related to the reclusion and gaming and her injury, I was trying to deal. I had published somewhere. I think I have it in my receipt somewhere. It's a long time ago, but with problems with faculty, I'm not sure how they put it, but problems like these, that they preferred to resolve things when possible, privately and informally. That was how they put it. It was in writing, at least somewhere. And I remember thinking like, well, I understand why they would want to do that. But I was also thinking, I think that's smart. And that's how I would like to resolve it. Because, I come to it already thinking I might have to do something like that. And that's how I start. I mean, the first person I contacted was, I think it was September 19th, I think, because that was my wife's birthday. be why I'd remember that. I think it was that day, but I called the vice provost of academic personnel, which is a very senior position here. And it was someone who I knew personally. So, and someone I know now. So it's somebody I knew personally and that I respected, I trusted. I wouldn't necessarily say that now, but I did at the time. And it's, it's an accomplished person. So, she's a real person. But I reached out to her and I told her, like what was going on and what my concerns were. And that was the first time I'd brought anything to UCI, like in a formal way, in an informal, formal way, I guess. And then kind of followed steps, and what ended up with it as a resubmitted written Title IX complaint, is where it ends up. But that was not where I wanted to end up. Started off wanting to find a way to do it like quietly and cool, and for lots of reasons, because we're in a company town, and then mostly because we live here and there's children in the house. So I didn't want to be I wanted to do things privately and informally. And just my personality was such that that's what I'd prefer. But I'd started to also do things, at least in our community, not online, in our community. I got much more involved. So I got on our homeowners board, which I wouldn't have done except for I was just asked to do it. But once on it, I got involved in ways where I felt like I had to be, how I said, like she was like, my ex was extroverted in a way where I'd be introverted or reserved. Well, without her, I felt like I had to be like the public face of our family, because otherwise it's weird. There's a professor who used to be like really out there in a public way, in a popular way, not in a negative way. But then she's gone, and then I'm there, and I'm with the kids, and I'm not on campus because I'm not a professor. I don't have a reason to be there. And we're kind of like closed in. So I tried to do more to be out there publicly, but that was just to try to fill the space a little bit that she would have been occupying, or more than a little bit, maybe. And then with the other stuff too, like on Twitter, I started with what was an anonymous account, and I never even meant to write about anything when I started that. I think I created it because I needed or wanted to find out something that was written on social media. I used no social media. I mean, I was online, but I was not on social media. And I think I needed to, or I thought I needed to create an account to do it. And so I did, but I did it anonymously because the things I'd been reading about, like if you end up in court, you don't want anything on social media at the time. Not that I'd done anything wrong, but like the written advice that I was reading was there's nothing that will help you, and there's only things that would be negative. So you don't want to have any kind of social media footprint. So don't try to be good. Don't try to do this or that. Just don't do it. And so I was not doing it, but I wanted to get some information. So I did that, and I used an anonymous name, which was Sarah Vernon. I was telling you. So I put that in, just random name. And that. So Sarah, and so Sarah Vernon was taken, so it was real Sarah Vernon. Like, I thought that was funny, because it's not real. But that was that, just so then accepted that name. And then I just used the name Sarah Vernon, and I just read things for a long time until I started writing something at some point. And a journalist, Susan Bassey, saw it, talked to me, and I told her I had to disclose to her that who I really was, which I wanted to do early so that she didn't feel deceived. And when I did, she said she thought it was hilarious, and she thought it was really smart. And she complimented me. She said, you write from a mom's perspective in a way where I wouldn't have guessed it at all. And so she encouraged me to keep the name and thought it was funny or nice. and then I did, and then Donna McCracken, some Orange County mom that I used to write with quite a bit, and she thought it was hilarious, like really funny. So I was encouraged to keep it, and then that's how I came. So at some point I started writing, and then I came across her. That's right. So yeah, Susan especially. So she had encouraged me to keep it, and out here in California, she's one of the people who've written about the family. So there's no coverage of the family courts in the regular news. It's very unusual. I think that's across the country. It's most certainly in California. So so because of that, especially, she's an important writer because she's got quite a few people that follow her and are listening to her. And then I knew that much. So I started talking to her. She thought it was funny. She also, I think, was especially interested in me because of my proximity to Katie Porter, who's a close neighbor. And, she's a congresswoman running for Senate. And she also, she lives around the corner, and also she says she was a DV victim, and she got a divorce, but she got hers moved to private judging, and Susan Bassey was researching that and wanted any insight or information I had about her. Yeah.
When did you start to talk about your story?
I can't remember exactly when it was, but it would have been probably in 2019, sometime in that year, maybe even more into 2020. I'm not exactly sure. I can't remember exactly. I probably started talking about things a little bit, and probably not specifically about my case, is what I'm guessing. Yeah. And then at some point I started talking more. But I've talked over, I've done a few things. So it was Sarah Vernon, and then at some point, so I'd have to go back and really look at sort of the evolution of the ideas. But I always felt that men and women needed to work together, like that the game was to divide. I came to understand that it's a business, and the way that they make money is by people fighting, and the thing that they'll fight over is children. They'll do anything for it. And so the way that you make money in that business is to have two sides that are always fighting against each other. And that's basically what's going on. And so the way that they do it is they pit men against women, is mainly how it is. And they're already oriented in that direction for the most part because of what they've experienced. So it wasn't quite that simple, but there were a lot of things that made me think. For instance, I'd started a Healing from Hidden Abuse book study group on campus. So it was like an in real life one that went for like a year and a half. I think maybe about between 15 and 20 women total were a part of it. Some of them were like every month part of it. And it went until COVID. And then I never restarted it, but it was in the home, it was in our home on campus. That was awesome. And so most of them were moms, not all of them. So that and some other things. And because I was kind of into education, I felt like I had a little bit more of an understanding for where women were coming from. Not for any special reason. Like some of these things are just like, because I was doing what I was doing, then that's how I got kind of the experience I did. Not like, you guys all suck, why can't you see it the way I do? It's more like, well, I've had this experience, and so I draw certain conclusions, and I think some of them are correct. So that was how I got to be. So then I was like queen of the beach. for a while because, you know, because I think I was talking about like all I wanted to do was just raise my children at the beach, but I have to have a female persona, so I'll be queen. You know, I mean, I want to be like the best thing I could be. It's also before I had any thinking about like MK Ultra and different things. So like even that, I probably wouldn't do that today just out of sensitivity. And I don't even know what it is. I just know that there's queens and princesses and different things, and I don't want to be inappropriate. I wasn't what I was actually thinking of. So, you know, I won't even explain that. There was a reason why like of the beach mattered, but then, so then I still have this persona. So then I was actually talking to someone who helped me understand some things about the land and Native Americans, and you know, I think I was talking about, and he said like, you know what, like, you know, the beach is like just one place, and it all belongs to everyone, you know. So that's like the idea; it's all sacred land. And so then I thought, well, you know, then I'll be Rocket Queen, you know, because you know that's like the top one. Might as well. But all of it was, I was sort of thinking like, I was trying to like put myself out there at that time. I was thinking like, get behind me, you know, is what I was thinking. Because I'd heard something where a guy said, hey, look, you know, if you're in a situation and there's children or women that need to be protected, you need to be the person in the front. And you have to be there. So this is somebody talking, and it was generally, and it was about something else. It wasn't even a main point, but it like struck me because I was thinking like, you know, I have like this female persona. I also think it's funny because they say you can identify as anything. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll identify as Rocket Queen, you know. I mean, if you can identify as anything, you know. But the other thing I was thinking is to get in front. I mean, like, attack me. And that was because I felt like I had the perspective of it, that they were men and I was talking to men. And then also, like, if I was to have any credibility with anyone who knew that it was really me, that I wanted to see them. Like, I'll go and deal with them and put it on the line. Most of the people don't know that, but there were a few moms that did know it. And other reasons probably, but mainly I just got to where it got to. But the thing about Susan Bassey is then she lied about me and she defamed me, and she won't talk about it. And that's really unfortunate too, because again, it's a fact. I tried to engage her about it. She doesn't want to do it. If I do it anymore, I think it starts reflecting badly on me and it makes me less credible. So it just sits there as a fact. And that one is disheartening because she does good work and she knows things. But she's also lying about me. She also won't touch Julie Holburn's case. She's been even worse to Julie. I mean, so it's not very good. And I have to wonder, well, what's her deal? Because I would like to get her back on the team. I have enough people I'm fighting with. I don't need to be fighting with journalists who are telling stories. So on the other hand, why is she doing what she's doing? And if she's dishonest about this, then what can you believe? And she's, you know, she wanted the stuff I had about Katie Porter, and she's running for one of the most powerful offices in the country. And she betrayed me right after that. I also lost at least 2 really important relationships because of her. On the other hand, she's writing, you know, like she's been effective in some ways. So to put that out there for what it's worth. And there's a lot of money and power and threats and children and blackmail and who knows what else. that's another thing. There's two moms specifically who, well, one ghosted me and one was even worse than that. And I don't know exactly what happened. But I know that for all I know, they got threatened. I don't know. Or they got offered some kind of good deal or something. So these are the kind of things, they're hard. One reason I like to talk about things is I don't want anyone to be able to have things over me. And I worry about people close to me, but, I mean, so many of your guests have had that exact same quandary, or conflict, like, on the one hand or on the other. Some way, way higher stakes than me, and some probably similar, but in different ways, So it's hard. It's best to, be able to, it's best to be transparent. It's best to get information out there. It's best to be honest, obviously. But, it's not always, you can't always do that. You really can't always do that, and sometimes you can say some things and not others. So it's not easy. Yeah. So anyway, that's Susan Bassey. That's pretty good information, I think. Maybe.
Well, it's an integral part of your story, and there's somebody else I want you to talk about that I think is really important too. And it's actually your pinned comment on your Real Sarah Vernon account, which is Wendy Miller. And I wanted to make sure that we talk about her too.
Right. Yeah. So Wendy Miller.
So this doesn't mess up, but I'm going to.
Are you going to put her on?
Just share this little thing. It's not going to play.
Yeah, right.
But
oh, that's okay. Yeah. Yeah. So Wendy Miller, and that's her. So definitely look her up if you're interested in anything about family court, CPS, corruption in the judiciary, and trying to help children and moms, but really focused on kids. So she's from Orange County. She's actually just, one of the things is she grew up, I think, just a few miles away from my ex, just a couple of years apart from my ex. So they're both from the same part of Orange County, like next door neighbor cities. But anyway, she left Orange County. She was married to a pastor. She was living in Holland, Michigan, which is in the southwestern part of the state, or the western part of the state. And she was a victim of, like, a lot of abuse, I guess would be the way to put it. Okay, I'm going to keep talking, Emma. You disappeared from the screen, then. I think I'm supposed to keep talking.
Yep, go ahead and keep talking.
Okay. I wasn't sure. She was in an abusive relationship with her husband, who is a Christian pastor in Holland, Michigan. And so one way we were similar is that we were staying in abusive relationships because we prioritized children, and we felt like for the short term anyway, that was how we could best do it. She ended up leaving with her two children when her daughter disclosed sexual abuse to her, which was was something she was experiencing. And so she took her daughter and her son and she left. Her husband was connected, in the city. And there was a warrant for her arrest, and she felt like she was acting on behalf of her children and laws to keep them safe. But anyway, she ended up coming home. She was sentenced to 90 days in jail, and she served 61, and she never got her children back. She stayed in as much contact with them as she could, but she ended up coming back to where she grew up, Orange County. She started an organization called Wings for Justice in Newport Beach, and she started trying to help moms and get them to organize together and to help each other, a community and a movement to raise awareness about the problem so that the society started to understand better what was going on, and then to walk beside survivors and victims in the family court system that were trying to protect their children. Usually moms, but not always moms. So my next door neighbor told me about an event that UCI was co-hosting with Wings for Justice. And it was being held at UCI, and it was an all-day event. I think it was April 5th, 2017. So based on that, she said, I think it might be helpful. So I went, and that was where I first saw and met Jane Stover, who's a UCI professor of law, clinical law. She's married to Dave Min, a state senator. They both moved to our neighborhood. But she's also the director of the DV clinic and the initiative to end family violence. And so she was hosting the big event. It was a big event with Wendy Miller of Wings for Justice, and she was the CEO of Wings for Justice. So I went, and and it was an interesting event. I think I was the only dad there, so that was kind of intimidating. And I just listened, but Wendy Miller absolutely just blew me away. I'd never heard anyone speak like that. It was straight from the heart. It was charismatic. It was the kind of person where you're like, yep, that sounds perfect. I'll sign up for that. And so I wanted to talk to her, and one thing about her was, and we were talking about this, Emma, she was inclusive of men and dads. So she talked about them, and she recognized that there were dads who were protecting children. At the same time, most of the people there and most of the victims are women. I think there's more in any way, the argument then is only about percentages, but there's men and women. And so she would include them, but in a real way, not like I have to include women and men, where it's just like real. So she would usually talk about moms, but then she would say, and dads too, or whatever. So it was so real, it would be like how real people would talk. And so I told her, I was like, man, that was amazing, to hear you talk. That was great. And she was with Jane. And so she said, who's helping you? Or I think I maybe even said, hey, maybe, would you help me? Or, would you consider it? And then she said, well, why isn't Jane helping you? Because, I was at UCI and she was at UCI too. And then Jane said, well, I'm conflicted out, which I guess she was, because I think at that time I was working for UCI also. But, she, like UCI's DV clinic can't represent someone against a UCI professor. I mean, that made sense. And so what Wendy said was, I'm not conflicted out. Which is exactly what she said. She's like, I'm not conflicted out. I'll help you. So I was like, awesome. So she was filming, I didn't know it at the time, but she was filming the video for the documentary from which that clip comes, and some other things. And so she went back to Michigan. And then when she came back to Orange County, it was like exactly 2 weeks later, and it was Good Friday, 2017. And we met at Keen Coffee in Newport Beach. And we talked for 2.5 hours, and it was about our case and mainly about protecting my daughter at that time. So I was concerned about, 11-year-old daughter and, family court and CPS in Orange County. It's like normal to worry about that. And so we talked, and she was also a psychologist. I was a dad and a lawyer. And so we were even talking about like, hey, once I get my wits about me and get my case a little bit more straightened out, like I'll join your team. Like you help me and I'm going to help you. And this is awesome. And, but the first thing was like, we got to get 100% custody. And especially, your daughter, we got to make sure she's protected. And so, that was Friday. And I went home. And then on Easter Sunday, her roommate called me and said, Costa Mesa police won't take a missing persons report for me. And you're the last person she met with, or in her notebook. So I'm calling you. I don't know what to do. So it turns out like that. So that was Sunday, midday, mid-afternoon Sunday. But when I met with her Friday morning, like that was Friday. And then she went to church that night, Good Friday, I think. And then she was out with friends at night. And so after coming home from that she was murdered. So she was murdered that night. It was a double murder in Newport Beach. And it was an execution. I mean, it is what it is. But I didn't know that when her roommate called me that it had happened that night. And I was at my sister's house. I wasn't at home, or I would have been banging on doors here. But so I called people and I wrote people, and I tried to reach Katie Porter, but didn't. I was trying to contact people that I thought could, because I thought this is bad, because she was by far the best DV advocate out here, the best, family court advocate. And it's weird that she's missing. She would never be missing like that. So I called, and then I called Jane, the person that she co-hosted the event with. And then I didn't get a hold of Jane, but I think her husband wrote back to me. And so we were emailing with each other. That's a guy who's a state senator now, and he wasn't at the time. I was worried, because I know a lot more now, but I knew enough at the time that she was talking about corruption, and the corruption was about powerful people. And it was really weird that happened. So that's Wendy Miller. I only knew her for that little bit of time. I only met with her once. I only knew her for 2 weeks. So the whole thing was now she had a co-founder. She was the CEO, but she co-founded Wings for Justice with someone named Ann McGuire. And Ann has been my advisor. So she's my advisor, and she has been since Wendy's Celebration of Life, which was overflowing, over 1,000 people across the street from UCI. People, she was from here, and people knew her, and she was doing great stuff. This is a person nobody talks about. Nobody was there from UCI that I even knew. And she was just, less than a month before was across the street with lots of people at her event. I'm not sure how many, but it was dozens and dozens. I think more than 50. And it was great, maybe even 100, So anyway, that's Wendy Miller. That was, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, so I went to it, I went to the Celebration of Life. And at that time, honestly, I felt like I barely had a right to be there, because the people there were people she'd been working with for a while, or people who taught her when she was in school, or people who knew her growing up. I wasn't thinking because I didn't know what was going to happen. I just thought wow, I can't believe it. I was elated that I had this person, and it seemed great. And, I was very hopeful, and then devastated just personally. And it was so sad. And then to the extent I was also thinking of it, it was like this person that I thought I was going to be doing something with, and now I'm not. And that means my prospects are not as good either. I went, so I felt like I barely even deserved to be there, but I felt like I had to be there. and I was. And then I felt like I had to, her mom was there, you know. So her mom was there. And, I got in line to talk to her. So I'm in line. And I was by myself. So I don't really know anybody, because nobody from UCI is there, probably. So I tell her, I'm like, I met with her and, she helped me, just like not that long ago, at the UCI event. And she goes, "Oh, you're the dad." It's like, she's like, "She told me about me the last time we talked about it, you're a lawyer." It's like, yeah, And then I thought, I don't think I told her anything. Pretty sure I didn't, other than that. But I thought to myself, like, well, I'm definitely going to honor her, right? What else would you do? And so, that's why it just stays there as the pinned tweet. And that's why I keep talking about it. It's not because I'm obsessed. It's also not because I think like there aren't other victims and there aren't other advocates that are great advocates. I do. But it's to honor her. And it's also because, what is everybody else doing? The court's worse than it's ever been. The power and the money that's here is way more than it's ever been, like right here at UCI. We're doing all this stuff and, and not only is it not getting better and obvious things aren't getting done, and it's embarrassing for me, honestly, at some level to even have to talk about this because it's so obvious. It's stupid. They have cameras in the court for COVID, but they won't let anyone see what's going on in there. Why not? They're public courts. You have them all wired up for COVID. It makes it's suspicious, and it's at least that bad at UCI. You put on an event with someone like that, and then you pretend like it didn't happen. She wasn't here. It's weird. And even if you didn't do anything, I'm just saying it's weird, not necessarily what anyone did. It could be just that, we're trying to get grant money to study things, not do something that's, that doesn't help our purpose. So other people can do that and the university will do university stuff. So even if you take a view that's like, well, it's not that unusual, it's pretty weird. Without any conspiracy or anything like that, just straight up. And anyway, I don't feel like I have a choice because it doesn't, it just doesn't sit right with me. And also I feel like, it's the only thing to do. What else would you? It wasn't like there were other people doing it too, or there were other people doing it just as well. It's like if you wanted to make an example, if you wanted to make sure that nobody was talking, that would be the person, not anyone else. She was the one that people thought, this is someone who could change things. Other people are doing other stuff. Nobody thinks that about other people. So it's weird. And it's also scary too. It's part of why I don't push my case a whole lot. I told you, I think my case makes a lot more sense if it comes after other ones like Julie Holborn, who, by the way, that's how courageous she is. She doesn't speak like, Malcolm X, right? she's soft, but she has so much courage to do what she's doing. She's doing it in public at a board of supervisors meeting where they're up high, and they have a lot of power. It's a big room. She'd rather be doing something else, but they took her kids. She knows what happened to Wendy Miller, and she knows what's happened to a lot of other people, and she's been punished for speaking out, and still she keeps talking. So that's why I promote her so much. If people wonder, there isn't another case in Orange County like hers, really. I mean, there are endless cases like hers. There aren't people talking about them. And then she and I do think at some point you get to a point where it's like, well, if you start talking, you can't stop. It's like, so I'm not saying necessarily we're better than anyone else. I can say things when my kids are older that I couldn't say when they were much younger because they have more individual power. So I'm definitely not being critical of anyone else. I was using it as an example of just how scary it can be. I'm also in a safe place. I would be, I mean, it's ironic because I'm on campus, which is like the scene of the crime, but I'm safe here. This is some of the people I was talking about that are powerful that I wish would make what I think would be better decisions and do things differently. They're the same people that if I'm close to them, I'm safe. And my kids are close to them, they're safe. So, real talk. If I'm in a dangerous place, I'm thinking, man, I'm such an inconvenient person for too many people, which is the last thing I wanted to be. So weird. So like if you believe in God, or that, like we have purposes here, and mine feels like it's sort of like, well, like my gift is I'm here. There's nothing special about me other than I'm here. And it's maybe not such a small thing in Orange County if you get on the wrong side of the wrong people. Is that okay to say?
Yeah, no, what you're doing is extremely courageous, and like when somebody does speak out, like you're carrying the weight of everybody else who's not, like you said, and
Yeah.
you're carrying on somebody's voice who's being buried, like Wendy's, like there's a big
Yeah.
responsibility with speaking out. And the more of us that do, the more people
Right.
get courage too. And so it's like you're lighting somebody else's match, you're lighting their torch. So then they can now see in the darkness and don't feel afraid because they see other people. It's not so dark anymore. You have a candle and Carrie has a candle and Mike
Right.
has a candle and oh my gosh, I can see now, and then they light somebody else's and it's the same. Oh my gosh, there's a light now. So it is like
Right.
a big responsibility to speak out. And, do not underestimate how important that is. You don't have to have a case like this person or that person for it to be
Yeah.
important. Like your voice speaks on behalf
Yeah.
of millions of people who are going through this, and it's a big responsibility to be up front, and to do it
Right.
first, regardless of what the case is about. A testimony is a testimony, and it's setting other people free, and it's letting other people take a breath, knowing, oh my gosh, there's somebody, I can't talk, but he is like, he's validating me, it's a big responsibility.
Yeah. Well, if it has that effect, or if it even has a little bit of that effect, I'll be really happy and grateful because, then this and you having me on will have helped me accomplish something that I want to do. And I've had some success, mainly on Twitter and a little bit here with Julie in Orange County, but I don't feel like I've made a whole lot of progress unless it's the kind of progress that's like if like boxing, which is a brutal sport, but like the idea of like body punches and like you could like you can knock somebody out with a big punch, or you can just have it cumulative and add it up and you do the work in a little bit at a time. And then at some point, like I just realized how horrible boxing was as an analogy. But at some point, they can't take it anymore. A better one would have been a wall, like the Berlin Wall. And, it's mostly like it's not physical, but people are like banging on that wall with their hearts, for decades. And it's there, whole generations, right? Whole childhoods on one side of that or the other. And then in a day or in a weekend or in a little bit of time, it falls, right? But it didn't just fall. It was like all that stuff and then that last thing. So, sometimes I'm discouraged. If it's like that, though, where it's like adding up, then I'd be really happy. And if anyone, is encouraged or gets something, then that would be great. Because, and I guess that I do want to say one other thing too, is that I've been critical of some people, in this, but I want to be productive. And I feel like things like unity, and belonging and love, they're so important that I try to not let, I love the way you do it. I think you're actually a really good role model of it, where, you give people room to have different takes on things, to, come along quickly or slowly. And so it's very safe and inclusive, but there is a line also where to be too easy on everyone is to not stand up for victims at a certain point. And so I think, so the model, and you're a really good one for me, is I want to be really quick to draw lines where there's something that's not right or abusive. But beyond that, where people are being real with each other, to try to give them a lot of space, to make mistakes or to disagree, that redemption is beautiful. So I want to win people over, I don't want to beat people, especially in this. So some of the journalist I mentioned and some other people, there's some moms specifically. I would rather lose something or, not get to say exactly what I want to say, but be able to be allies with people, So I think that's a big part of it, And maybe it's in a way my story is different for some others, because some of the people you have on have really bad people that deserve to go to hell. And it's really hard to imagine anything here on earth that could, redeem them. So I don't have anything like that. Closest thing I have to that is my ex's parents, because when she was bad, they were talking to me every day. How she is. I kept our children in touch with their grandparents, and they're the ones, whatever happened in Hollywood, they were the ones, driving them there every day. And, that's the thing about Hollywood too. They're not really interviewing the kids. They're interviewing the parents, because they want to know which parents will deliver children to them. Because, a lot of them are exceptionally talented for sure. And a lot of them really want to do it, and it's a worthwhile thing to do, to act. But there's lots and lots of kids, lots of talented ones, Not all of them have parents, though, that will hand them over. So they're the bad guys, I think, in this for me. But even them, they're watching it, I want what's best, for people, for children especially.
So what can people do to support you? Is there some way that if somebody wants to, they can follow you on social media and you can go ahead and tell them where to follow you, but is there anything that people can do to help your case or to help your mission?
Yeah, for sure. So, I don't have too much of I don't have a channel or a real presence online. I have the most followers at It's real Sarah Vernon. You can find it. It's not that hard to find. And then I have an account under my name. I don't write on it as much, but it's the initials JB _Conley. I think the best way that people could help, the way that people could help me, and like I'm not even sure. I wasn't really prepared to answer that. I hadn't thought about it much. But definitely would be to support Julie Holborn. So mom, her name's Julie Holborn, and she's in Orange County. Her case is pretty similar to mine in some ways. It's especially similar in that we are opposite, like really big power. Not all the same, but similar. Some of them are the same. Her ex is abusive. Orange County is obviously corrupt in her case. It's obvious. And it's just terrible what they've done to her. And she's a good mom. She's not perfect. She's a really good mom. And she cares. And her ex it's weird how he got custody. And it's a really bad case. It also has to do with reunification camps, which just got outlawed in California, and a lot of bad stuff going on around her case. My case, I basically abandoned my case. So, and I did it a while ago, and it was for a few reasons. Mainly, man, I look weird because I have this sun coming in over here.
Okay.
If it's not too annoying, I'll just keep going. It's not in my eyes. It's weird though. I have to keep looking at it. So here, hang on. I gotta drink some water.
Sure.
So what happened with this is another show too. What happened with my case generally is I got to a point where anything that I did in that court, anything I did or tried to do was going to have negative consequences for my kids. And not just kind of theoretically, but like specifically. And so I've had to switch to a point where I'm actually I'm not supporting my wife, like financially and not emotionally either or anything like that. But I am aware that she's not exactly in the best spot in her career because she's like a beneficiary of the fact that they, that they rejected my case, which was an obvious case, and then they kept covering it up. So she's a beneficiary of that, but it's in a difficult way. And I feel like it hasn't made anything at all right, but she's already paid a really high price. So I'm not going to attack her anymore, especially when, what am I going to do? Make her lose her job? And I'm not. If UCI wants to fire her, I'm going to be the first person arguing that they should not do it, that they can't. And they'll look bad. They'll look bad either way, but it's terrible. We're in an impossible. So my priority was not to win a case. My priority was to protect and raise my children as best I could every day. That was number one at the top of the list of things to do. That was number one. Every day it's been. So that's what I did. So if that means abandon the case because it's totally corrupt and the FBI is investigating it, and I just want to stay out of the blast radius, then I'll have to figure it out. I don't know. Do I lose my law license? Do I lose everything I have? I don't know. But to fight there was only going to, does that kind of make sense? Like to fight there? If I fight and lose, I lose. If I fight and win, then my ex loses and she doesn't have a job or a career. We don't have any connection to this place. Then we're really desperate. Then we're like, how do we feed our children desperate? And anyway, maybe God wants me here so I can say, well, here we are, now what are we going to do? because people wanted, they wanted things anywhere from, I want to be a senator to I want to get some money for something, or I just don't want to deal with things that make the university look bad. So could this just go away? Whatever it was, I feel like we need to deal with it. And I'm not inclined to just pretend like what happened didn't happen. I mean, so it's weird to me. Like, to me, this seems like devastating. What are you going to do? It's like corruption with judges and at the highest levels, and it's not really sugar coated. On the other hand, I feel like I've been saying this for years. Like I'm saying things that lots of people know. So, so I kind of feel like, well, this is earth shattering. And I also feel like, well, did I even really say anything? Because it's not anything that I haven't said before, including in writing, on Twitter. A lot of it's there. I mean, I know everybody's got their own lives, and mine's just, a life. But I mean, almost everything we talked about, I mean, one way or another, I kind of put there. So I don't know.
Yeah, I am so proud of you for speaking out and for doing more interviews and stuff like that. Like like you validate other people's stories and you give a voice to people that don't have them,
Yeah.
so thank you for what you're doing. And so would you say if people want to support you, jump on Twitter and support you that way, follow you and
Yeah, I think so. I mean, jump on Twitter, join the conversation, follow. I mean, I can't really advocate my own or another way of looking at it, since I can't really advocate my own case, then the best thing I can do to kind of show who I am and what happened is through other cases. And so the main one would be Julie, but there are a lot of other ones. And there are a lot of other people too, like Morgan Stellar Truth, I think is a really important account and person. She's a firsthand whistleblower, the only daughter of a lawyer who was convicted of human trafficking. And there are other accounts as well. I think Megan Walsh has the biggest voice, and I follow her and I subscribe to her. I probably don't agree with every single thing she thinks or writes, but if not, I almost always do, and she's excellent. So like supporting and following cases like that. Bad Investments is a graduate student at Harvard. She was abused by Orange County DA sent investigators to Boston to Harvard for her, and she was a victim who never even set foot in Orange County. So like that's a crazy one to follow. And then there's a lot of moms too, Abolish Family Court and some others. I mean, there's way more than I'm thinking of, but I kind of roll with the same people. And I think just to, in your own area, raise awareness. I think court watching is something, if they think, wow, what he's talking about is something I'd like to be involved with, but I'm not in California and I'm not connected to any of those cases. If you wanted to help people, just being a witness to what's going on, being like in Orange County, an in-person court watcher makes a difference. They don't do some things that when people are watching, and there aren't people there a lot of the time. So things like that. And I intend to do more over time. And as I do, if you're with me, then you'll see. I'm not really trying to grow. I'm trying to meet people on Twitter, like dating, but not dating, but like meeting people who are interested in, hard truth, finding out what's really going on, MK Ultra, all of that. But then especially in the family courts and talking about helping real people, what's going on right now, and then making and reforming the system. So, I may have more of a thing going on in the future, but I don't have any plans for it other than to keep doing what I'm doing. And then if I do more or something else, then I'm sure you'll find it, or maybe Emma will tell you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And are there any closing thoughts today? Is there anything that we didn't cover yet that you wanted to say?
Um, I'm sure I'll have like a million things afterwards, but
You can always do a second one too. I know that this is just a little bit of your story that we told.
yeah, no, I'm grateful to be able to get like that much of it out there. And I'm sure there are things or there are aspects of things that we didn't cover, but like the main one, I guess, would be, or the main ones would be that I think it so it helps me. One thing that's really helped me is to start everything with like children, like what's best for them, what's their nature, what do they need, and are we addressing it, and can we do it better? And then another one would be, so I see it a lot of the time and I feel it a lot of the time where it's like, how can people not see what's going on? How can they be so, so blind to it? Or sometimes I'll feel like, or don't care, or don't see how it relates to them, or anything like that. But then I remember that the truth is that, like, before I got it, I didn't know, and even when I knew some, I didn't know the rest of it. There was a long time where I thought like everything happening in CPS and anything related to like things like MK Ultra, if it was even a thing, all of that, Hollywood was not related to my case. And I was thankful for it. And I mean, I even had my advisor, Anne, was telling me, like, hey, this stuff is going on. And I was kind of thinking, like, yeah, well, maybe, this is a while ago. So like a message for people would be to the extent you can and that it's even appropriate, but to the extent that it is, to kind of like give people, or to like have that mindset, because it, like for me anyway, it helps me like not be so frustrated with people, and to also think like, okay, if I'm taking someone who has no idea what's going on and I want to get them to where they have a little bit of an idea what's going on, then what do I do? So like almost everyone here is of one party, and to argue about politics is ridiculous. And it's really ridiculous. But even if it wasn't so ridiculous, but you just wanted to kind of meet somewhere, it doesn't help to like argue. But like, I mean, I'll be like, so for me, I always say like, well, I always agree at least half because I think they all suck. And so everybody thinks at least one side is bad. And so it's sort of like, I mean, we can agree on that and then we can go from there, be like, hey, you know what? It seems like they're kind of working together because you notice they never talk about, the thing. Do you ever you notice how they never talk about family court, even though there's all this stuff going on? It's weird, huh? So have, to the extent you can and it's appropriate, like I'm not talking about victims appreciating abusers, but just people that aren't, all the way there yet. Like try to have some understanding and like kind of bring them along because it's for all of our good, and we need help. We need to educate people. So that's helped me, is to remember that I didn't know the things that are obvious to me, they weren't always. That'd be I guess that'd be the last thing.
That's a great point. Just having empathy.
Yeah.
Everything that you said today was so brave. Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing. It's an honor to finally have you on after a couple years of getting to know you, and your story is incredible. Like I learned a lot today that I had never heard before, which is crazy.
Oh,
Because I have known you for so long. So getting to hear your story now is really cool, and I ask everybody to pray that things, shift in your favor, and that these, the truth gets revealed and that justice is served in one way or another, even if that's just cleaning your reputation of the things that you've been accused of that aren't true, and letting the truth come out, and, ultimately healing for your family. It is like kids get affected by this, and, we should want healing for everybody, if that's like how you say, and, in the best interest, for the people that do want it. So I ask everybody to pray over you and your family. And I ask everybody to please go follow Brad on social. He does an awesome job at the real Sarah Vernon, and then at JB underscore Conley, Conley, for those of you who aren't on the screen listening. So go follow. Did you have something to say?
No, just thank you very much. I appreciated the time you gave me.
Absolutely. It's my honor. You have, and I know we probably only covered just a little bit, of what you've been through. So you're welcome
There's
on
more.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's more.
If you want to share more, you're more than welcome to come on. And obviously, if you start new projects and things like that, and if you guys want to learn more about Wendy Miller, go to Real Sarah Vernon. It's the pinned comment. And you can scroll through Brad's pages and you'll see other parents' cases. And he's a really great person to ally with if you listening are a parent going through this. I try to provide you listening resources and people to connect with. And, the more that we build our own personal networks and connect with like-minded people, the less alone we feel, the more validating our stories are. And we're better together. As Brad was saying, there's movements just in the family court movement where it's sort of like the women against the men and then the men against the women, when it should be parents against perpetrators, and we need to do better as a community in understanding and always putting the kids first and saying, what are we standing against? It's not me against you. It's not one sex or another. We fall prey to that in our own ways sometimes, not coming together, but using division tactics ourselves, even if that's not the intent. So go connect with Brad. You guys go follow him on social media. I'm going to have it all in the show notes. I will have all of our social links in the comments, also in the show notes. I am on multiple platforms. So if you guys are on Apple or Spotify, leave a review and all that good stuff, but also go follow on YouTube just because I never know what's going to happen. And then same thing, if you're on YouTube, follow me elsewhere just because I never know, where I'm going to be and where I'm not tomorrow. So you guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Brad, you've been an incredible advocate for this show, and I can't thank you enough for everything. This show wouldn't be what it is today without your support. So you've been an integral part, and it's an honor to have you on. So you guys, thank you so much for listening. God bless you, and we will see you next time.